By 2012, Pokemon had a pretty established history when it came to their mainline games. Even all the way back in 1998, the games already laid the groundwork for their pattern. Two mainline games that mirrored each other, with a third game that tries to bridge the gap between the two. Red and Blue had Yellow, Gold and Silver had Crystal. These games tended to make some changes, but largely stuck to the original story and formula of the first two games. In Generation 3, Legendary Trios were introduced, which created a sort of symmetry with these third releases, a pattern we've seen continue to this day. Now, the third game would focus on the third Pokemon of the trio, altering the storyline to reflect this. We saw this somewhat in Crystal, except Suicune is not really in a trio with Ho-Oh and Lugia. Generation 4 continues this trend, giving us Pokemon Platinum as a somewhat fixed version of Diamond and Pearl. Sure enough, in Pokemon Black and White, our main set of legendaries was a trio. Zekrom and Reshiram battle it out alongside the protagonist in Inn, and tucked away in a cave somewhere is this little random grey guy Kyurem. Given the naming themes of Pokemon games up to this point, it was pretty well established that the third game followed the naming convention of the first two. So everyone geared up for Pokemon Gray, ready to see whatever the hell Kyurem does, until something different happened. Game Freak broke the formula for the first time. The third game in Gen 5 wouldn't be a third game at all. It was actually two games. Not only was it two games, but it was a sequel to the first two. Generation 5 would receive direct sequels in the form of Black 2 and White 2. Not only was this more of a game I already liked, it was more of a game I already liked. For the first time, we'd get true continuation of the story that I had played through. But, I can't say that meant too much to me at the time. I was 12, I had played a sum total of 2 Pokemon generations before this. I was a fan of the franchise, sure, but I wasn't really as well versed on it as I am now. Any new Pokemon game would have gotten my dumb little kid brain excited. They told me I was gifted as a child, but I think that was just a cover-up. I would have accepted anything you put in front of me. I didn't appreciate it then, but over a decade of hindsight and not being a dumbass kid have made me really appreciate the fact that these games got to complete what I believe to be a good but somewhat lacking story. More of the thing that I like is always appreciated. Of course, all of this only really applies if the work that they created was actually any good. If these games were resolved in an unsatisfying way, then all of this would have been for naught. A bad ending can, and oftentimes does, retroactively ruin a good thing. One of my favorite TV shows is That 70s Show. It's not high art or anything, but I really grew to like the characters of the show and the relationships that they formed. I also think that the show is incredibly funny. However, the last season of the show totally destroyed a lot of the characterization I liked about them, while also trying to limp to the finish line missing 2 of its main cast members, attempting to rectify this situation by combining them into one character I did not like. I'm sorry, Josh Myers. I did not care for Randy. All of this is to say that there's always expectations, no matter how high or low, and failing to deliver will have lasting consequences, especially in a franchise as recognizable as Pokemon. And I don't mean to sound like Black and White were being held on some incredibly high pedestal at the time, because that's just not true. The receptions of these games got on release was nowhere near as positive as they're received in current year. My favorite video game of all time is Pokemon Black. I think that's worth stating up front, but I love these games for what they are. I want to see, with as little bias as I can manage, what makes these games work both as a sequel to Pokemon Black, as well as the conclusion to Generation 5, something I would consider to be a landmark shift in Pokemon as a franchise. Now, if we're going to do this right, I do feel compelled, in true video essay fashion, to talk about the storyline as to better articulate what all of this even means. So, let's do this one more time. Now, the first thing I want to say is that moving forward in this video, I will largely assume that you've seen my analysis of Pokemon Black and White. I don't know that it's required viewing to understand what I'm talking about, but I wrote this line in the script when the video wasn't finished, so I'm just going to encourage you to watch it anyway, because I made it and it's awesome. So if you want to check it out for the first time, or just want a refresher, bam, here you go. I'll also add that this is, obviously, a full analysis of Pokemon Black 2. If you're here and you haven't played the game, and don't want the story spoiled, can't say that I didn't warn you. Now, with my massive preamble out of the way, it's time to start our journey once again in Nuvema Town. Hey, where the hell is this? Yeah, so these games don't start in Nuvema Town. They're about as far as you can get from Nuvema Town, actually. Aspertia City is probably my favorite starting town in any Pokemon game. For so much of the history, all of these towns looked virtually identical to one another. There are all 2 to 3 houses accompanied by the professor's lab, and none of them are all that interesting. Even Nuvema Town falls victim to this. There's nothing that makes it stand out either. Aspertia City is such a nice change of pace for a formula that had already felt stale a long time before this. Another cool and minute detail is that for the first time you start in the same place as the first gym. I think it's a nice change of pace for the world building in a Pokemon game. So many of them fall into the same pattern when it comes to how you start. Small town into large city. The reason people expected Pokemon Gray was because for a long time now Pokemon had kept to its fairly rigid formula. In what has become an increasingly common trend in Generation 5, this game will lay the groundwork for a future game to expand on this idea. The last thing I want to say before starting in earnest is that because these games are direct sequels, I decided to play through Black 2 for the sake of continuity. I won't say what that continuity is at this moment, but suffice it to say that I purchased White 2 when these games came out. Reshiram represent. The game begins with our mother getting a call from Professor Juniper outside our house, expressing her interest in giving us a Pokemon. Something that's always confused me a little is, does the professor give every child a Pokemon? I would have to assume no, because how on earth would that work logistically? In the first games I kinda get it, because we're the annoying ass neighbor kids and you can just ship us off across the region to make us go away. Here though, Juniper lives nowhere near us, so I have to assume that she helps us get a starting Pokemon because she's friends with our mother, and if that's the case, that's nepotism and fuck you. I do find it amusing that this is one of those core things about Pokemon that just never gets touched. I'm not even suggesting that they do away with the starting trio of Pokemon, I just find it amusing that the circumstances under which we encounter our first Pokemon rarely ever changes. The other interesting thing that happens here is we learn the person expected to bring us our Pokemon is Bianca. This seems like a good a time as any to mention that these games take place 2 years after the events of Black and White. This means that one of the more interesting things these games will do is show us the character development these people have undergone since Team Plasma tried to get everyone to release their pets into the wild. Bianca ends Black and White by realizing that being a trainer is just not her specialty, but she still wants to work with Pokemon as a researcher, which we have already learned she managed to do in the 2 years since. Our mom tells us to go find Bianca, and as we head outside we run into Hugh, our rival for the game. I had originally written in my notes that Hugh reminded me of Charon, but I don't know that I agree with that assessment anymore. Hugh wants to get stronger, sure, but his reasoning for doing so is much less self-serving than Charon was at the start of Black and White. Encountering Bianca at the lookout starts the standard Pokemon tutorial. You've all played a Pokemon game, you know the drill, yada yada yada. We're sent off to give our rival the town map, a very common occurrence in order to move the game forward when we have yet to establish the goal, mainly beating all the gyms. This, of course, is only the goal until the plot kicks in whenever we meet the antagonistic team for the region. Also, my Oshawott is shiny now, don't worry, she does that. At Flockacy Ranch, we encounter the owners of the place, who tell us that a herdier has gone missing. Hugh immediately volunteers to help search for it, even going so far as to say it could be gone forever. Even the owners are confused by his zeal, but this is a really good characterizing moment for Hugh before we learn why he feels this way. Deep in the ranch, we manage to find the Pokemon, accompanied by a strangely dressed individual. The herdier clearly doesn't want to be here, and as soon as we encounter him, the man runs off. A super weird encounter overall. We head back to town and train some with Alder, the champion from the previous games. Now notably, when we encountered Alder here, he did not introduce himself as the Pokemon champion, something that was made very clear to us when we encountered him in Black and White. Very curious. At this point, we get introduced to one of the weirdest features in this game. This is Mr. Metal, who encourages us to compete in something called the Metal Rally. What this entire mechanic boils down to is it's basically an achievement system. Do a specific thing, Mr. Metal will reward you with a medal that you can collect in the Pokemon Center. There are 255 medals to collect in this game. Well, there used to be. With the discontinuation of Wi-Fi services on the DS, only 247 of them are actually still obtainable without cheating. The whole medal system is just a bunch of achievements. They don't have any bearing on the game, you can't redeem them for anything. They just mark when you've completed various milestones such as watching TV 10 times or checking an empty trash can 10 times. Now, I hear you saying, Pokemon had an achievement system in the form of ribbons which could be used to track the milestones you've achieved with a certain Pokemon and were retained through each game in one form or another. And that's all well and good, but these achievements are linked to your game and cannot be transferred. Ooh. I actually do like this mechanic somewhat, even if it feels a little pointless. Achievements are a staple of video games for a reason. They're a small but satisfying way to reward players for exploring a game to its depths. There's a dedicated subset of people who go out of their way to complete all the achievements for games, especially ones they're passionate about. I like this game a lot, but I am not going to try and get every single medal. It's first gym time, and the gym leader is none other than Sharon. I know that the focus of these games is not specifically on the growth that Sharon and Bianca have, but the start of the game does do a lot to answer questions about their character arc. Sharon becoming a gym leader makes a lot of sense. He's learned to use his strength to help others reach new heights, not just to simply be the strongest. We even see the foundations of this at the end of Black and White, where Sharon challenges us to a battle in order to make sure we're strong enough to stand up to N without the aid of Reshiram, if we can't manage to awaken it from the Lightstone. There's not a ton else to note about this gym. I honestly like it less than the original first gym in Striation City. Seeing Sharon and his character arc is great, but I really like the emphasis on teaching the player that the original first gym had. This is especially ironic considering Sharon's gym is literally a school. Instead, our two battles with the kids at Alder's house serve the role of teaching the player about type matchups in this game, and I mean, it gets the job done, I assume. I have known the type matchups by heart since the release of Pokemon Platinum because I was an obsessed child, but I really like the style that the Striation's restaurant gym had to it. This is just a school. Just like in Pokemon Black, Sharon stands no chance against me, especially now that he doesn't have the starter that beats mine. One thing you'll notice quickly in these games is that unlike the first two, the Pokemon you can catch in Unova is no longer restricted to just Gen 5 Pokemon. We've already come across Pokemon like Mareep, Riolu, and now Dunsparce. One of my favorite parts of the original games was how you could only encounter the new Pokemon. I talked about how it made the region feel like it wasn't retroactively trying to pretend like these Pokemon were always around by containing them to the Unova regions. In fairness, I'm not really sure the gimmick would have worked as effectively the second time around, as limiting yourself to the new 150-ish Pokemon would probably just lead to people building the exact same teams as they had the game before. Because of this, I will begrudgingly agree that it's probably a good thing that they shake up the Pokemon so heavily between games. More choices is never a bad thing, but I played a lot more Pokemon Black than I did White 2, which means that seeing the older Pokemon in a lot of these areas feels very strange to me. Virbank City is very grungy looking, which is convenient because that's the theme of the gym. We encounter the gym leader, Roxy, arguing with her father about his dreams of becoming an actor. This argument serves as the blockade for us. We can't set sail to Castelia City until this conflict is resolved. I talked a good bit about this method of player prevention in the last video, and I stand by most of what I said there. I will add that it does allow for more varied story progression than "this tree's in my way." While he's off performing his audition, Flint here blocks us from getting into the studio. Nice to know he got some work after being a member of Sinnoh's Elite Four. The nice thing here is that we can immediately take on the gym. I say can because I wasn't paying attention during Roxy's encounter with her dad, and I spent the next 15 minutes trying to figure out where the hell I needed to go. This being a poison gym really sucks if your favorite starter is Snivy, but I picked Snivy last time, so fuck you, Roxy. This gym amuses me because it's a gym themed around a band, with each player playing their instruments along with Roxy singing vocals. This is not the only gym centered around music, and yeah, it turns out voice acting a musician in a Pokemon game is just not technology we have in the year 2019. I talked before about how the music for certain locations can be added to by finding musical NPCs scattered around the area, like in Humilau Town with those two NPCs that live on the hill. In this gym, we actually do the opposite. They start by all playing their instruments, but as we beat them, different trainers and their accompanying sounds go away. It's a neat little detail. Defeating Roxy has drawn the attention of the man blocking the way from Pokestar Studios, who was so impressed with our battling that he invites us to come audition to be an actor. Which, I guess, is how The Rock got his start, so we're well on our way to making a quintillion Pokédollars. Pokestar Studios is maybe my favorite thing this game has to offer, and it kills me a little bit that we don't get to talk about it right now. My first time through this game, I think I did as many of the movies as possible before remembering I was supposed to be completing the main story. I don't want to get too specific right in this moment though, but Pokestar Studios is a really neat take on battling, and I wish we had more attempts to use the mechanics of a Pokemon battle as the basis for a minigame like this. We get to encounter another character who's undergone a change since we last met them. Bryson has returned to his previous career as a movie star. I like that this little detail about his life actually came around to mattering. It makes me wonder how long Pokestar Studios was in the works for, because it certainly feels like they had been sitting on this concept for at least as long as Black and White was out. The Captain's movie is so bad that they offer to let us replace him, and I really think my acting career is going to take off. Now that we've crushed a man's dreams, it's time to get back to the Unova that we're familiar with. Except there's one problem. Outside the shipbuilding, we encounter more of those strangely dressed individuals stopping us from boarding the ship to leave. I'm actually shocked we've made it this far without talking about Team Plasma. Last time we were directly introduced to them fairly quickly. We met Getsus and some of the members, and learned about their ideals very shortly after making it to the first city in the game. Here though, we're only catching them at the tail end of Virbank, though I suppose we did meet one grunt already, and the resemblance is pretty clear. I don't like Team Plasma as much this time around as I did the first time. There's a core factor as to why I don't, but my main complaint is that a lot of the nuance has been removed from them. Well, some of it was implied nuance, I suppose. Team Plasma in the first game at least attempted to make a compelling argument for the release of Pokemon. It was largely on the back of a sole individual, as their actions rarely, if ever, reflected this intention, but nevertheless it brought about a dialogue of ethics that Pokemon had not really experienced before. This time, Team Plasma is much more in line with the evil teams of Pokemon games prior. Neoplasma, as I will now refer to them so I can distinguish between the two moving forward, makes no attempt to mask their actions as benevolent, as even in this first encounter with them, these grunts remark that their plan to take over the world 2 years ago was a total bust. There is one interesting detail that comes from this conversation. This grunt refers to Anne as a traitor, saying he betrayed them all those years ago. This struck me as odd because, from my perspective, this was definitely not what happened. N was pretty clearly betrayed by Getsus, not the other way around. I like this story detail because it speaks to how heavily Getsus' character has lied and builds Team Plasma in a way that I think makes a lot of sense. They remind me of a cult in that regard. Well, in more than one regard. But Getsus shifting the blame onto N to avoid taking any responsibility for his own involvement in the plan failing is not even remotely shocking. One way that the shift in Team Plasma can be seen is through their main theme. Both songs use the same rough progression, but the first one is much lighter in tone. To me, it has a few moments where it doesn't sound so malicious. Neoplasma's theme is far more sinister. It's much faster paced than the original, far more manic. It has a much greater sense of urgency than the original theme, which makes sense given that Plasma has dropped all pretense of altruism. We spend a moment here chasing Neoplasma down before we're officially able to board the ship to Castelia. Sailing to Castelia City does not quite hit the same as taking Sky Arrow Bridge, and what sucks is that we're not allowed to visit Sky Arrow Bridge until the post-game. This moment just doesn't instill the same sense of wonder in me as the original, but the more I think about it, the more I'm okay with that. I had originally wanted to be very critical here about the difference between our journey in this game and our journey in Black and White, but I mean, of course it's not going to feel the same. I've already been here before. I've seen Castelia City. So that original sense of wonder this place has already been taken. Even though these games have proven their willingness to make changes, I can still probably expect to see some of the standard Pokemon game affair here. I can still predict with some level of accuracy what's going to happen. Pokemon is a franchise rooted in routine after all. This is still a nice moment that speaks to what I must imagine is our character's first time crossing the sea and journeying to the largest city in Unova, and the towering skyline of Castelia does impose that upon us quite well. We've made it to Castelia now, and hey, that's a weird looking ship. Anyways, welcome back. Unfortunately, while this is my favorite city in the game, not a lot has changed since we were here last time. At least, not in the city proper. This is true for most of the locations that aren't new to this game. There are some minor differences, but none of these places have received major overhauls. This is pretty standard for these third Pokemon games though. Even something like Platinum, that visually overhauls a number of areas, doesn't really change the layout of any of them. While it would be cool to see these places evolve visually, given the amount of new areas introduced, that probably wasn't a priority. However, I would argue that given the game's focus on a 2-year time jump, that highlighting these changes would be more in line with the game's themes than focusing on new areas. But I'm not about to complain about getting more new areas in my favorite generation of Pokemon. Liberty Garden was the location I really liked in Black and White, predominantly because you could catch Victini. Unfortunately, you had to have an event item that is no longer obtainable to get there. Well, this game brings some good news and some bad news. Good news is you can get here without the Liberty Pass now. The bad news is that Victini is not here. I like to think this means that the player catching Victini is canon though. But because of that, there's not much to do here. You can buy 20 lemonades if you're interested. Heading to the gym, we're told that Berg isn't there, because, like I talked about last time, there's some problem we have to solve before we're allowed to complete a separate, unrelated objective. Here we run into Iris for the first time again. When we tell her we're looking for Team Plasma, she mutters to herself about where to look before immediately taking off. So far, the beginning of this game feels very reminiscent of the originals. Our introduction to Team Plasma is less direct. Getsus doesn't come out and proclaim their goals to us right off the bat, but we do have our first encounter with a grunt in the second town area, where he can be found mistreating a Pokemon. We then encounter them a second time after the second gym, before chasing them down in Castelia City. The major difference is the lack of a central antagonist so far. It's a fair assumption to make at this point that Getsus will play a key role in the story. He did escape at the end of the last game after all, but we do know that the spotlight is not his favorite place to be. Chasing Iris through Castelia leads us to Thumb Pier. Thumb Pier? Okay, sure. Chasing Iris leads us to Thumb Pier, where Hugh runs in and immediately dashes into the sewers. This is the most significant change made to Castelia City. There's also a hidden area of sorts we can access from the sewers that makes me think of a hidden park. I'm almost embarrassed to admit how long I wandered down here for looking for Neoplasma, but it was something to the tune of 15 minutes, and I've played this game before. Beating Neoplasma, we get introduced to this strange individual. Well, I guess that's not fair. He looks perfectly normal for this world. He congratulates us for bringing out the potential of our Pokemon and defeating Neoplasma before immediately leaving. He reminds me a lot of Karen, the Team Galactic scientist who debuted in Pokemon Platinum, which, side note, what does he even do in that game? He's just kinda hanging around for most of it. I like a lot of the changes in Platinum, but I struggle to think of exactly what Charon adds to the game. His most prominent role is in Stark Mountain, where he's searching for Heatran and then he gets arrested, but that's kind of all the story he has. I got a little off topic there, so let's return to Castelia City. Last time I complained about Berg's gym, mostly that I thought it was ugly, and to be fair, I like it a lot better this time around. Now, one could argue that it's a lot more sterile being predominantly white, but white is one of my favorite colors, so I'm definitely biased in favor of it. His gym feels much more like an art exhibit this time around, something I could definitely see in an art museum. The Harlequins are sort of a weird choice still, but I can kind of see them as performers in the exhibit. I like Berg's room a lot, it's much more fitting as an art studio than whatever the hell the first one was. As we head for Route 4, the strange man formally introduces himself as Colress. He talks more about his goal of bringing out the potential of Pokemon and asks us to battle him on Route 4. Heading there, he clears the obstacles in our path and talks about how he disagrees with Plasma's goal of liberating Pokemon to bring out their potential, as he thinks this is something that would be best accomplished by humans instead. I love the design of Colress, easily one of my favorite characters in Pokemon, second only to Anne. It's cool to see a scientist with such a prominent design in one of these games. A lot of the time they're background characters. This is just my definition of cool, I don't know what to tell you. The difference here on Route 4 is night and day. Last time we were here it was a desert filled with construction work. I alluded to the fact that a major change would take place and, well, here we are. I like this version of Route 4. It makes me think of a little oasis in the desert. Arizona immediately springs to mind. It makes this location fit in more with the inspiration of the US now, if a little geographically inaccurate. I doubt it's intended to be a direct parallel to the US, what would be the fun in that, but I do think the inspiration is a little more clear for Route 4 than it was before. Especially with the road completed now, connecting both gates instead of making us wade through the desert. Now, I imagine some of you are a little confused here. If you have any memories of Black 2 and White 2, then you might remember things a little differently than this. In White 2, Route 4 does not look like this. These games take place in what is essentially a branched timeline, as during the construction of this place, two possibilities occur. The first is that they build these little collection of houses connecting the two places. You get the idea, I just talked about this. The other is that while working on this project, the workers come across a series of ruins, which halts the construction on Route 4 completely. They dig up these buildings and the area becomes a historical site. In White 2, there is no developed area here, only what I just described. I do like the Black 2 version of this location better because I think ruins in the desert is a fairly common trope. I like having a different take on that in the form of these houses. If this were a world location, my feelings would be completely different. I would much rather we preserve the environment than keep developing, and discovering ancient ruins is a great way of halting development. I didn't talk about the theme of past and future in the Black and White essay, but this is not our first instance of it by any means.
This theme is present in the version differences. The easiest example is Opelucid City, with the two versions of the city mirroring the same dichotomy we see here on Route 4. You could also argue that Black City/White Forest are also part of the past and future comparison, though that one strikes me more as a nature versus technology discussion. This is more of a visual theme for the game than anything. I can't think of many examples of it in the game's main story. You could argue that we represent the past, the status quo, keeping our relationship between Pokemon and people the same, where in represents the future, represents change. But I think the game doesn't really take in all that seriously, and as soon as we extend that definition to apply to Neoplasma, it makes it seem like the game is saying that the future is bad and to never challenge the status quo, which I don't think is the message that they're trying to send. I hope it's not, at least.
Before we get into Nimbasa City, we have something else new to talk about. Join Avenue is very akin to an early version of Street Pass on the 3DS. I guess Black and White also had passerby mechanics, but they were not as robust as Join Avenue is here, so I just didn't talk about them. Unfortunately, this is another mechanic that has fallen victim to time moving forward, which is a shame because I actually got to use this one a fair amount as a kid. This place allows you to invite characters who pass through to open shops, as well as recommend other passerbys to visit existing ones. Now, notably, unlike Intralink, Join Avenue does still function in offline mode, as NPCs will still appear who can populate the area with shops. But the people you pass by with the game on will visit your avenue, which makes it more fun. The different shops sell some pretty useful things, such as EV items for your Pokemon, or ways to reset them for easier EV training. You can even get a fossil or win a Master Ball as a prize in the raffle. It's a pretty neat thing to do in the post-game, but it's nice that you can just start working towards it midway through the game. Nimbasa City is largely unchanged, both visually and in the terms of the narrative. A lot of what we're about to experience for the next several cities is less about the plot as a whole and more about our journey as a Pokemon trainer. This is basically what happened at this point in Black and White 2, which is pretty common for Pokemon games. It does mean that aside from talking about the gym here, I don't have too much else to add about Nimbasa that I haven't already said. We know from the previous games that Elisa is a fashion model, which I praised the game for helping to flesh out the gym leaders by giving them more characterization through their secondary occupations. The weird part though was that Elisa's gym didn't really reflect her personality or typing. I mean, roller coasters use electricity, but if that's the bar we're trying to clear, you could have the gym be themed around just about anything and it would count. This time around, her gym is a runway show, much more fitting. But before we can enter the gym, we do have to do the roller coasters again. Yippee! This is so weird because this is the only gym where they just have a second one right next to the first one. All the other old gyms were completely overhauled instead of doing this. The new gym looks nice visually, if a little boring. I guess they decided that 3 trainers in a hallway didn't make for a particularly interesting challenge. With Elisa down, we are once again Driftveil City bound, but we do need to stop and pick my next team member and talk about another new mechanic in these games, Hidden Grottos. There's not much to how Hidden Grottos work. They're little secluded areas that can contain either an item or a Pokemon, and what item or what Pokemon vary pretty heavily. The reason I care about them is because this first grotto is guaranteed a specific Pokemon, Minccino. Minccino is not rare by any stretch. I could have gotten one from the route we are literally on right now, but the true value of Hidden Grottos lies in the fact that any Pokemon you encounter in one has its hidden ability. I can't remember if I spoke about hidden abilities before, but if I did, it wasn't very in-depth. In the last games, there was only one way to get a Pokemon with a hidden ability, through the Pokemon Dream Link system. I never used this mechanic, and at any rate it hasn't worked since 2012, so it's not a viable option today. In these games, however, we still can get Pokemon with their hidden abilities, and this is the easiest way to get them. Minccino's hidden ability is Skill Link, a crazy powerful ability that ensures every one of its multi-hit moves will hit the maximum number of times. Also, my Minccino is shiny now. Don't worry, she does that. Before we can leave Nimbasa City entirely, we first have to have another minor battle with Neoplasma. Hugh finally reveals his intense hatred of Team Plasma comes from the fact that another member of Team Plasma stole his sister's Purloin 5 years ago. I find this detail interesting because it reveals to me just how long Team Plasma has been in operation for. Based on the way Black and White starts, with Getris introducing them and their goals in Humilau Town, I just sorta assumed they hadn't been in operation for very long since nobody seemed like they'd heard of them. But evidently they've been around for a good while.
I guess this shouldn't come as too much of a shock, because in order to build a castle that big, it would take you a pretty significant amount of time, especially considering the fact that they built it in secret. I just don't get the impression that Plasma had been around that long until Hugh tells us his sister's Pokemon got stolen 5 years ago.
I had initially thought Hugh to be another version of Cheren, much the same way that Generation 7's How and Hop seem similar. That was the note I made when originally playing this game, but I do take that back though. I think most Pokemon rivals share one defining trait, that they all want to become stronger and beat you in a Pokemon battle. That kind of personality matrix is important considering that's the main reason we get challenged over and over again. If they didn't do that, they wouldn't really be a Pokemon rival. The why is more fascinating though. I think that at this point in Pokemon's history, Hugh is one of the more complex rivals we've had, which is not a high bar to clear. Hugh's fire and hatred of Team Plasma comes from a place that's very understandable. When he says these things, I don't question why he feels this way. I love Barry, but he's a pretty one-note character. There's very little depth when it comes to why he is the way he is, and the greatest obstacle he faces is losing a battle to a galactic commander, hardly a massive hurdle in his life. This also gives us a more personal stake in stopping Neoplasma, if a somewhat small one. This is more than we usually have, even when compared to the last game. We kind of just stopped the enemy team due to a moral obligation. How this obligation falls continually to a child is beyond me. One of my bigger complaints from last time was how the games handled triple and rotation battles. They introduced this new way to have a Pokemon battle and then did essentially nothing with it. There were like 6 total battles to be had in either game, all of which were missable, and the only way to do them repeatedly was an NPC in Opelucid City. You couldn't even do triple or rotation battles on the subway. The whole mechanic felt like a wasted opportunity to try and push a new style of battle. Now, I don't know how well they would have actually taken off. Both styles are pretty convoluted, but the fact that they didn't even try really annoyed me. This time around, at least, we now have required triple and rotation battles. Additionally, there aren't really version exclusives anymore either. You'll have to do at least one of each in order to complete these games. I like this change, but it feels too little too late. By virtue of these games being the second release of Gen 5, they were always going to sell less than Black and White, so the amount of eyes you have on these games is less immediately out of the gate. Still, I'll take what I can get. I think part of me cares purely because when they came out, this was the new thing to do and there was just nowhere to play it. Gen 6 proves that neither triple nor rotation battles were all that popular, as now you could finally partake in them in the Battle Mason, Gen 6's post-game battle facility. And I think it proves that I don't know that I ever liked them because they were fun, but more just because they were new. Once the novelty wore off, I forgot about them. I had totally forgotten they were even in Gen 6 until doing research, so what good really comes from all of my complaining? The Driftveil City theme, still a banger, who would have guessed it? The city has actually had a major overhaul, and I like the way it looks now a lot better. I remarked last time that it reminded me a lot of locations from Generation 4 in terms of the hills and building design. It's a far more colorful and vibrant place now. The stone has even changed to a lighter color, making it stand out more from the surrounding routes, which were very mountainous. I also mentioned last time about how I found it weird that cold storage was located in a place that I associated with Southern America, likening this place to Texas. Well, I guess they took my suggestion to heart because cold storage has been removed completely, replaced now with the PWT instead. This feels much more fitting to me, and it's nice to see another piece of post-game content placed somewhere that doesn't have a ton going on otherwise. I will continue to be bitter about the fact that it wasn't in Castelia City, but we'll move on from that. The first thing we see upon entering is a former Plasma member arguing with a current one, the latter encouraging the former to take up the mantle again and continue stealing in the name of Plasma. The former member says he can't do that to N, at which point the other member calls him a traitor and a joke right before Hugh appears to intervene. I've spoken previously on the weird divide between Team Plasma and the first 2 games. N was, of course, the biggest outlier in terms of people who seemed out of the loop in Team Plasma, but in this game it's implied that some of the members from the previous iterations were loyal to N, which is why we have these defectors now. If memory serves, a handful of Team Plasma's NPCs from Black and White talk like their goals might be in line with N's, but by and large this was not the case for 90% of the grunts we encounter. The leader of this group of reformed Plasma members is Rude, one of the former 7 sages. Rude talks about how the people who live here now take care of Pokemon who were separated from their trainers by Team Plasma. When Hugh points out that separated is not necessarily the right word to use, Rude apologizes for what they did, telling Hugh his sister's Pokemon is probably still being used by Neoplasma. Hugh doesn't really accept this apology, which Rude understands, saying you can't move forward without first admitting your mistakes and trying to do better yourself. This is one of the most poignant pieces of dialogue in the entire game. This is an important lesson to impart onto children. What does forgiveness mean? What does it look like? Nobody is required to forgive your actions, but that doesn't mean you can't stop seeking forgiveness. Based on the way Rude talks in this conversation, I've somewhat changed my mind on the kinds of people that have joined In's cause. It seems more likely that these people were not initially loyal to In, but rather came around to his way of thinking after the initial collapse of Team Plasma. Rude was someone who had a lot of power in the original structure, and I very much doubt there was any ambiguity in his mind as to the ultimate goal of their organization.
This whole interaction is a strong effort to flesh out Team Plasma and add some moral complexity to the narrative, as I had complained earlier that Neoplasma lacked that component of the original team, as thin as it may have been there. I really like the idea of friends who were split apart by their differing ideals on Team Plasma, and I wish we got a little more of that later in the story.
One last thing I'd like to highlight about this encounter is that it ends with Rude giving us a Zorua. This is a notable thing because in the last game there wasn't any way to obtain one legitimately in the modern day without some form of exploit. I think this is a problem because I don't like it when Pokemon are kept behind arbitrary restrictions like this. This Zorua is a little different though, as it was formerly owned by In. In's Pokemon is a new mechanic in this game that in order to properly explain, I should first mention to you another mechanic in this game. Memory Link was the game's way to bridge the gap between Black and White and Black 2 and White 2. You could sync your save data to these games, and based on the checkpoints you had cleared, you'd get access to different memories that explained various things during the 2-year gap between games, such as what happened to Crest, Silent, and Chili's gym, or how Iris becomes champion, things of that nature. This is such a neat feature that I honestly did not remember existed, but for the sake of staying focused, the memory we care about is this one, meeting friends, saying goodbye. This memory showcases En releasing his Pokemon sometime before he obtained Zekrom, lamenting how he can't bring himself to let them get hurt by battling. In the last video, I remarked how En's team changes every time, and alluded to the fact that En released his Pokemon and found new ones nearby to battle you. This memory pretty directly confirms that. At the very least, it confirms that En was definitely releasing his Pokemon after the first series of battles. The significance of this memory from a gameplay perspective is that we can now find En's Pokemon in the wild, allowing us to catch them for ourselves. There are 15 of En's Pokemon in total, the first of which being Zorua. Zorua is obtainable regardless of if you've completed the memory link or not. The rest are unavailable until you do. I wish I had known about this mechanic back when I played these games originally. I assume there must be somewhere in the game where this mechanic is mentioned to us, maybe it's in the instructions I didn't read, but this would have been a really cool thing to experience for myself instead of having to learn about it online. I'm all for more world building in ways that don't attempt to hold me hostage. I've written my fair share of world building as a massive nerd, and the urge to just tell people about it is a strong urge, but in my experience, most people just don't give a fuck. A much more effective method is to get people invested in a setting and allow them to uncover things for themselves. It's much more meaningful when you're allowed to engage with the world on your own terms, and this does exactly that. Now, unfortunately, it is limited to you having purchased a $35 game, and that was the price of it when it came out. As of the time of writing this, it would cost you somewhere around $80 now, and that's just the cartridge alone. There are a couple of game mechanics that Memory Link lets you access, but they don't amount to an $80 price tag, as none of them are overly impactful. Thankfully, Memory Link does not lock us out of any Pokemon we could not otherwise obtain, as Zorua is given to us for free no matter what. Unfortunately, future games will not adhere to this rule, but that's a topic for another time. When I first set foot in this gym, I was convinced that it was going to be exactly the same as the old one. This hadn't been true of any gym we'd experienced up to this point, but it looks exactly the same from the entrance, so I just kinda assumed. I imagine this gym is a lot more time consuming if you actually attempt to solve it, but I just looked up a map online, so it was actually pretty easy. Texas has been defeated once again, after which Clay invites us to participate in the PWT, meaning we interrupt this story to undergo our very own tournament arc. I'm honestly surprised we haven't had more of these. It does feel a little strange that we take this detour to enter a random tournament in the middle of our gym challenge, but it's a nice segue into yet another game mechanic I kinda want to talk about. The PWT is another piece of post-game content, but we get introduced to it right here. I'll talk more about the PWT as a post-game objective later, but the important part here is that during the final round, we face off once again against Colress, which is a pretty easy fight since this Pokemon are all level 25 to my, appropriately leveled Pokemon. Leaving the PWT, we see a Neoplasma Grunt run by, which causes Hugh to run off in search of them. Colress once again speaks about what it might take to bring out the potential of Pokemon, discouraging us from chasing down the Neoplasma Grunt, calling it reckless. Following Hugh, we see that same funny ship we saw in Castelia City. weird how it has a similar color scheme to Neoplasma. Must just be a coincidence. Oh shit! Team Plasma's castle is no more this time around. Their base of operations is this ship, the Plasma Frigate. This ship is much more fitting for them this time around than the castle, as their whole knight motif has been dropped with the exception of the Plasma logo, which bears a strong resemblance to a coat of arms. Their new design doesn't really have much to do with the ship, but the color scheme matches, and I think Neoplasma would kind of look ridiculous dressing up as sailors. Okay, so I didn't talk much about the design of Team Plasma last time, and I admit that was a disservice, but they do look a little ridiculous. Ann's design is fantastic. Getsus looks pretty good too. I'd actually give all the sages a pass, but the grunts, these poor people. It's the hoods mainly. I get that they look like squires. I presume the intent here is to create a chainmail kind of look, but they just don't look good. If they took the hood off, I think it'd be fine. I don't think the knight theming is lost because the hood isn't there. The crest and the tunic are pretty distinct. I don't think we're really losing anything by removing the hood. It's not like these are the only dorky designs. I mean, the bowl cut squad is iconic for how goofy they look. But Team Star from Scarlet and Violet isn't any better. They don't even have bikes. What, are they afraid they're gonna trip and hit their heads? I will give Plasma a little credit here, and I don't think their goal was to look intimidating initially, as that would really defeat the idea that they're just advocating for the freedom of Pokemon. Neoplasma, on the other hand, look like terrorists. I mean, there's no other way to say it. Intimidation is the name of the game, and oh boy are they succeeding. The new look definitely fits with what I consider to be the new perception of Team Plasma, but even though they're unabashedly evil in this game, they still occasionally take time to talk about liberating Pokemon, which strikes me as a little weird. We defeat a bunch of Neoplasma grunts with the help of Charon and Hugh, and once again Hugh tries to ask about his sister's Purloin, which to me seems like if I asked a bunch of animal poachers about my missing dog. Doubly worse because every goddamn Purloin looks the same, but everyone treats Hugh like this is a reasonable thing he could get a real answer on. Zinzolin interrupts our conversation with these grunts, and Charon immediately recognizes him from cold storage. Before we can have a discussion about the moral implications of Pokemon battles and Neoplasma's use of them as tools while also parading their desire to liberate Pokemon, Zinzolin kicks us off the ship with the help of the Shadow Triad, instantly vanishing in the process. With that out of the way, we can now continue our trek to Mistralton City, a journey that is largely unchanged since the last time we made it. Along our way this time, we do encounter Cobalion, which isn't something that happened last time around. You had to go out of your way to find the Swords of Justice, starting with Cobalion here. It's nice to be rewarded for your exploration with a legendary Pokemon, but it helps if you at least know they exist. This does mean now that Mistralton Cave doesn't have much of a function. The most important thing you can get here is an Axew if you want one, or the TM for Rock Slide, which I guess is something. Neither of these things is as good as Cobalion, though. Chargestone Cave isn't worth expanding on in this video, especially since we have no major encounter here, so hey, we're in Mistralton City now. Still not technically a city, but I respect the tenacity, so I'll let it slide for now. There's not a ton of changes to Mistralton either. The gym is the main thing. Now it's one massive wind tunnel, and damn do it be fucking windy in here. One nice thing is that we don't have to deal with the Celestial Tower before Skyla's gym this time. We get here and there's not an arbitrary obstacle in my way stopping me from progressing at this moment. It's dumb to care about something like this that much, but we're, I don't know, 45 minutes into this video. You don't have anything better to do, so there's no turning back now. One incredibly minor change I'm shocked I didn't mention sooner is that the gym music has actually changed slightly in these games. The same beat and chord progressions are still there, but in this game the piano has a much heavier synthetic element to it, where originally it sounded much more organic. This is also true of the theme that plays when the gym leader gets down to their last Pokemon, this time featuring a lot more bells. This isn't a significant change, and I know that. It doesn't dramatically impact the narrative or affect the music thematically, but it all still feels like Gen 5. So why bring this up? I like this change. I enjoy the fact that much of the game's soundtrack is new or contains updated music. I had originally started playing these games back to back, so it was nice to hear something new. I may have then taken a months-long break due to losing a bunch of progress at the hands of my own incompetence, but that part's not relevant. My point here is that while these minor changes are nice, they're just that, minor. If this game was comprised of nothing but these minor changes, then I wouldn't really have a whole ton to say about it. You see how long this video is. I still have a lot of ground to cover, and part of the reason why is because of how much has been added to the story by making these sequels and giving us so much more to do. Let's look at Pokemon Platinum again for a second. Platinum makes a lot of changes that I would consider good. It helps make more of the areas distinct from one another. Eterna Forest is the prime example I always think of. Diamond and Pearl are so full of these trees, so it's nice that in Platinum we get a little change of pace from time to time. Eterna Forest even has little gaps in the canopy so that sunlight can still seep through. However, I feel like changes like this are more the exception than the rule. A couple of the gyms have changed, but as far as the whole picture is concerned, these games are incredibly similar. I love the Distortion world, but it really does a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to changes in these games. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon fit into this category as well. I remember the release of these games. People were not happy with how little was changed to justify the $40 price tag on release. Sure, this is still the definitive way to play the game, but it feels like DLC for Sun and Moon more than anything. And when I inevitably make a video talking about Gen 7, I will not do the same kind of analysis for Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon like I'm doing now. I just don't think there's enough to talk about. Nostalgia's a powerful thing, and I don't want to get too in-depth with it right now, but it seems clear to me that a lot of effort went into trying to add to the world of Unova in Black 2 and White 2. They add a lot of things, and are still probably more complete games than Black and White, but they're not comparable in the same way that Sun and Ultra Sun are. They're not the same game, and that's part of why I love this generation of Pokemon so much. Well, we have Skyla's badge, and damn, shouldn't have run my mouth about not going to Celestial Tower. Ah well, at least we only have to walk in and talk to her on the first floor. This time around, we're not going to Icarus City. We won't get access to Icarus City until the post-game. The gym is no longer there. Instead, we're flying with Skyla to Lentimas Town, and we even get to use the airport. I talked about last time that the airport serves no function, and I guess they must have heard me because we get to use it this time. I didn't actually have a problem with it the first time. I liked that some of the infrastructure in this world was stuff we weren't privy to. But it's like they say, show an airport in the first act. Arizona looks lovely this time of year. Lentimas Town is actually a pretty neat addition. There's nothing spectacular here. This town is largely a waypoint on our journey to Opelucid City. In my notes, I wrote about how the cutscenes improve in these games. It's kind of strange to look back at these notes when writing the script, considering I wrote them over a year ago, but it does allow me to have a more objective view of the things that I said before. I partially agree here, they do get better. I talked before about Spear Pillar, and there's a pretty substantial difference between something like that and even something like this, but I don't want to pretend any of these cutscenes are groundbreaking. This one in particular is something you could have accomplished early on in the DS's life cycle as well. But they do take time and effort to create, and I appreciate the break from the traditional view of these games when it comes. None of that is why I bring this up though.
I talk about these cutscenes so much because I think we kind of miss a lot of this charm in the newer games. It's no secret that people didn't like Sword and Shield when they came out. I was among those people, in fact. I had no intention to own the game until someone gave it to me as a Christmas gift, and one of the big reasons why was because I just didn't think it looked very good. And I don't mean that in the way where I thought the games were so ugly I didn't want to play them, because that's not true. I was a die-hard Nintendo fan as a kid. I own not one but 2 Wii U's, so believe me when I say that my standards are low.
There's something deeper here that concerns me, and it stems from the way these games present themselves. Another big complaint was the frequency with which Sword and Shield had seemingly phoned in the animation. Be that fading to black instead of animating anything, Zacian hitting this sweet move, the way time freezes when you get on a ladder, it just feels like there's a level of polish missing that I wish was here. It's not like Pokemon is some small indie game made by a tiny development studio. We're talking about the highest grossing media franchise of all time. This shit prints money. I think Scarlet and Violet try a little harder than Sword and Shield, but man do these games feel unoptimized. Even comparing Scarlet and Violet to Breath of the Wild, a game that came out 5 years before, feels like night and day. Look at that render distance, I can actually see things that are far away. I don't want to rag on them too hard though, because these games have to implement features that other Nintendo games do not. The amount of compatibility in these games is insane when you think about it. The fact that all of these games can send and receive Pokemon between one another is honestly very impressive, and maintaining that level of connectivity is probably not an easy task. All this is to say that designing a game is more complicated than I understand, but the impression it leaves is one that does not always feel like they took their time. Where's that Shigeru quote at? Where did I put it? I don't know, but you get the point. Yearly releases are great for more of the thing, but they're not always great for the people who have to make them. Landing in Lentimas Town, Juniper fills us in on the plot real quick. She tells us about Neoplasma's goals, which largely haven't changed from last time, use one of the legendary dragons to take control of Unova. Of course, this time around there's a slight hiccup in that plan, that being that neither of the dragons is even in Unova anymore. Her hope is that, like before, that Drayden will know something of use, and so we go to Opelucid City in search of answers. While the path we're taking to get there is a little different, the story beats are very similar right now compared to Black and White. We're just chasing answers to something that Team Plasma already knows, and it all relates back to Zekrom, Reshiram, and Kyurem. I remember being really impressed stepping into Reversal Mountain. There's a lot of ambiance here, especially when comparing it to something like Mount Coronet in Diamond and Pearl or Twist Mountain here. There's just a lot going on visually, the water dripping from the ceiling into the little pools of water on the rock, or how the drops collide with the stalagmites on the ground. This just isn't the kind of thing I've come to expect from caves in a Pokemon game up to this point. They're usually very one-note and boring. Even in this game, many of them don't escape that stereotype. This becomes less true in later games, sometimes, but it was just a nice refresher when I wasn't expecting it. Before we set foot in Reversal Mountain, Bianca mentions a rare Fire-type Pokemon here. Wonder what that's about. I don't know yet, but it doesn't matter because this area isn't really much of a dungeon, it's basically just a straight line. That is, for me. See, this is what it looks like here in Black 2. In White 2, this place looks much more fitting, instead being filled with lava. Notably though, the layout is different, blocking off part of the path that would otherwise have made it a straight shot across, meaning that in White 2 I would have actually had to walk around this entire thing. This is a strange change to me as it means that one of the games has it significantly harder in this area than the other. Until Town is yet another place that I don't really have to add upon. Cynthia went home, so we can't battle her here anymore, the Riches Villa's gone as well, but none of these things are significant changes. The most important aspect of this area is the Abyssal Ruins, but we're not at the point in the game where I can talk about that yet. Oh look, it's Hugh! Time for another battle, and we're done! I genuinely don't have much else to add about this area for now, so instead of watching me fight every trainer on these two routes, let's just head straight to Lucanosa Town. This is my favorite location in these games. It's a very simple town, and there's never anything of importance here, but the aesthetic of this place really stands out to me. Honestly, it's probably just that this place reminds me of Santorini, which is one of, if not the most beautiful places I've ever seen. Back to Lucanosa Town though, Juniper takes us to speak with the old woman who gives us some lore about the Pokemon that lives in this giant chasm. This is obviously Kyurem, which I guess we canonically didn't find at the end of the last game, unlike Victini. Of course, nobody ever refers to Kyurem by name at this point, that's a reveal for later in the story. I do take issue with this a little bit. We see something similar happen in Pokemon Platinum, but at least there the game is an alternate timeline of sorts where the other player never encounters Giratina, much less catches them. I recognize that Kyurem has to be here for the plot to move forward. If your character in previous games caught Kyurem, there's no plot. I guess I wish that the game wasn't pretending like he didn't exist. It feels like a pretty underwhelming reveal when it inevitably happens, but there's always been this air of mystery around legendary Pokemon, which I suppose is justified given their exclusivity. I have a little more to say about Kyurem's lore once we get to Opelucid City, but we're interrupted by Zinzolin and a grunt again. Zinzolin is spouting the same rhetoric they did 2 years ago about freeing Pokemon from people, saying that people are so used to civilization, which he equates to Pokeballs, and wants to know what happens when you take that away. He has no qualms about admitting how they intend to accomplish that goal by putting Team Plasma in charge, people who have proven themselves time and time again to be morally reprehensible. And it's not a secret either, as their leader, their true leader, is exactly the same. Village Bridge continues to annoy me because you can't fly there. Again. Glad to see that there are some things that haven't changed. We do get to crush this guy's dreams for fun, always a nice touch. On our way to Opelucid City we run into Virizion. The game is quite literally throwing legendaries at me. I already walked past Cobalion, so I'm just gonna squeeze right on past you, don't mind me. Opelucid City is almost exactly the same as it was last time. It's actually a little weird to see 0 changes in one of these locations, because there's usually at least one, no matter how minor. Castelia has the fewest visible changes, but it still has the sewers and the little grassy area. The only notable change here is that the path leading to Route 10 is no longer accessible, as Victory Road has changed locations in this game. The gym this time is a lot more straightforward, but still looks very visually similar. I don't know how many ways you could design a black and white dragon-themed gym, so I'm willing to give them a pass on this one. Mechanically, the gym works differently enough that I think it's a substantial change. I talked last time about how I like gyms that contain puzzles, which this gym does not, but there's something about the aesthetic of this gym. It really reminds me of classic first-person shooters like Doom or Wolfenstein, and I think that's pretty charming. I talked earlier about how this time triple battles are a requirement, and lo and behold, the game is finally making us play the thing it added a year ago. This was a seriously weird decision the first time around. I guess the argument was they didn't want people to participate in something if they didn't want to. I don't know, it just screams of a lack of confidence in the thing they designed, but better late than never, I suppose. The gym leader fight was a lot harder this time around. No angry ice cream cone to give me a free win. Instead, my plan was to swap in Ferrothorn and let Haxorus slowly kill itself, an act that took like 5 minutes. None of that matters because the legend badge is mine now, which means we can talk to Drayden about what he knows about the monster that stalks just outside Lucanosa Town. Because the game can't count on people having played the first one, and because our character doesn't have the same knowledge about Zekrom and Reshiram as we do, Drayden starts his expositional dump by recapping to us the lore about the pair of dragons, how they were once one, they split apart, yada yada yada, but then he tacks on something new. He goes on to say how Kirim was part of the creation story as well, something he failed to mention the first time around. I don't get this, because if Drayden has always known this, why not just tell it to us the first time around? I mean, it's not like the stakes weren't suitably high at that point in time. Knowing a third legendary dragon might have helped us if we failed to obtain Reshiram. I guess the logic here is that Drayden isn't sure Kirim is real, even though he has the DNA splicers, which he admits are just as old as the Dragon Spiral Tower. The whole thing rubs me the wrong way, but I guess it technically makes sense, so I'm willing to grumble about it, but move on. I will say his argument for not believing is a little strange. It seems to boil down to Reshiram and Zekrom are strong. Could a third Pokemon exist, and wouldn't it be weak, almost like a husk? To which the answer could be, and literally is, yes. Before I have the chance to argue with Drayden about this, we're interrupted by a sound outside. We look up to see the plasma frigate descending from the skies, ready to fire upon Opelucid City. This is one of my favorite scenes in the game. I don't think the frigate is as imposing as Inn's castle, but damn does this scene do a good job of raising the stakes. It certainly expresses the fact that Team Plasma is not fucking around. The big reveal here is less that Plasma has a base of operations, and more in the fact that it's a floating fortress with a giant cannon on it, which up to this point we did not know that it had the ability to fly. Opelucid City is covered in ice by the frigate, which changes the map of the city for exactly this moment. Opelucid City will go back to the way it was once we progress with the story, so this map changes for a singular story beat. This is just another one of those little things that I appreciate for the effort that went into it. I also think it speaks to my affinity for places we only ever get to see once. Plasma isn't just here to exhibit their power, but I'm sure that was the nice bonus. No sooner do we learn about the DNA splicers than Neoplasma comes to steal them from Drayden. How exactly do they know he has them? I'm not entirely clear. Nevertheless, the Shadow Triad manages to swipe them from Drayden after he reveals their location talking to us. The thing I'm most interested in here is the way the Shadow Triad speaks about Inn. Speaking about their mission, one member says they don't have the ability to captivate the hearts of others like N does. This is one of the few times where N hasn't been directly disparaged by a current member of Team Plasma. In fact, it comes across as reverence. The Shadow Triad were also adopted by Ghetsis, so it makes sense that they'd have a closer connection with him than some grunt. Even if they agree with Ghetsis, it seems like they're not necessarily willing to vilify N, but they still serve Ghetsis' plan. As far as our current roster of Neoplasma members go, I certainly think they're the most interesting. There's at least some moral complexity at play here, at least when it comes to their relationship with N. Since the Shadow Triad has taken the splicers, it's now our responsibility to find them. Charon has tracked Neoplasma's frigate to an area near Humilau City, convenient since that's the last gym's location. The way to get there is by going back to Undula Town and going through the marine tube. In the last video, I talked a lot about Black and White's ability to pull tricks seemingly out of nowhere. My favorite example of this was Sky Arrow Bridge, something we're sadly barred from experiencing until we beat the game this time around. Things like Sky Arrow Bridge, Castelia City, or Two Blind Bridge give the world depth in places that I might not have been expecting. I expect all the stops to be pulled out during the story's climax. I can even kind of anticipate it at the beginning in order to get the player hooked, but it's the way that the game seemingly pulls these moments out of nowhere, often when the stakes are low or when we're simply on our gym challenge. Marine Tube is another example of this. We're pretty late into the game, sure, but we're not quite at the final act just yet, and Marine Tube is a place of total insignificance to said plot. If nothing else, I would feel remiss if I didn't show you all how cool this place looks. God, I wish Pokemon had more underwater style areas. No, not like that. I do not want that. Speaking of Gen 3 mechanics, welcome to Pacific Log Town. Of the new cities that have been added, this one is probably my least favorite. I don't have anything against it per se, it's just the least interesting to me. I like large cities in Pokemon games, and Lentimas Town is much more visually interesting. Humilau City seems kind of like an extension of Undula Bay in my mind. The gym is super sick though, easily carries my entire interest in this place. That and the frillish cutout board. I love you, Frillish Cutout Board. The gym here is water-themed, which, given that it's a water-type gym, you would think that's the standard. And you would be wrong. Wallace, Juan, what the fuck, guys? What is this shit? I'm getting off topic, so let's talk a little bit about all the added locations, since at this point we've experienced most of them. I know I've done this a little bit already, but hear me out. I'm of two minds when it comes to this. I love the fact that this game has so much new content to explore in Gen 5. More of the thing I like, you get it. It's not just new places either. We haven't even really talked about the new post-game content, and we've even been introduced to some of it already. On the other hand, logically, these places don't feel like they've been here the entire time. This was the same issue I had when talking about adding new Pokemon and trying to pretend like they've always been there. I applauded Black and White for sidestepping that issue the first go-around, which they went back on for these releases. Obviously, adding new locations to these games falls into a similar trap as the one I just described. I think ultimately it comes down to how much you're willing to suspend your disbelief. Because it's not impossible that in our journey last time we simply just didn't go to some of these places because it didn't matter. We had no reason to journey to Virbank or Aspertia City. I take more issue with Lentimas Town, a place only accessible through one of two ways, and one of them definitely did not exist 2 years ago. I will concede that none of this is technically out of the realm of possibility, however. There are lots of remote places all over the world, even within the United States. And yes, I know I'm thinking too much about this, but I wrote the essay and I can talk about whatever I want, damn it. Where was I again? Oh, right, Marlin. For my money, this is the most visually appealing gym in either of these games. I'm innately a sucker for landscapes, and the whole place feels very alive with flowing water both when you step on a lily pad as well as all the fountains scattered throughout the gym. Mechanically, this gym is just a variation of a typical ice puzzle, but there's a lot less ambiguity as to the path, which is something that I'm sure people can appreciate. My favorite part of this gym, though, is when you beat Marlin, he just fucks off. There he goes. Humilau City is largely just a small stepping stone on our path to confronting Neoplasma. We don't really arrive here with any particular urgency or even necessity, as the thing that lets us progress is Colress giving us the Colress machine.
I don't say that as a criticism either. Having every location we visit have some kind of direct objective to the story would kind of place the whole thing on rails, even more so than a Pokemon story already is. This is one thing that I like about the earlier games, is that there's a lot less direction in how you're supposed to take on things. The trade-off here is that there's also a lot less story going on. The game is mostly about your journey to defeat the champion, so, you know, give and take.
Colress instructs us to try and use the machine on Route 21 near a cave, so that's where we set out for. This lets us push Crustle out of the way, giving us access to the Plasma Frigate again. I've spoken a lot about this ship already, but we do have more to talk about, because we finally get to venture inside to take on the evil team's base of operations. Before we can do that, we first have to get help from Marlin, who lowers the gangplank on the ship, allowing us to board. One thing I didn't mention before was Marlin's neutrality when it came to Team Plasma. When we met him, he had absolutely no idea who they were. And when we tell him about them, he's curious if they're actually bad people. This whole exchange comes more from a place of ignorance than one of malice. Marlin is so disconnected from the conflict that he genuinely knows nothing about Team Plasma. When we encounter him here, he gives Hugh advice to think about why you're doing what you're doing. This is an important message in general, and one that I think would have worked better in the first game, where the illusion of heroics was still a prevalent thing among Team Plasma, but I'm finally glad it's being brought up, as it was one of my biggest complaints from the story original. We're now finally free to roam about the ship after defeating this grunt. Following Hugh inside the doorway, we come face to face with more Plasma members. Who could have seen that coming? But more importantly here, we realize that in order to progress, we have to solve a puzzle. And it's my favorite kind, a warp puzzle. Yay. I talked about this last time too. These are super common for the villain headquarters. We didn't have an official one last time, Inn's Castle didn't have one, but the Desert Resort did contain a similar puzzle during the climax of the story, so I'm willing to count that. The other puzzle we have to solve here is one in which we obtain a password from a couple of grunts, and oh boy, was I not good at this bridge puzzle. At least this one felt like it had a solution I could actually work through. One minor change here is that in White 2, the order in which we do these puzzles is reversed. The first sublevel contains the password puzzle in that game, and the warp puzzle is incorporated into the moving pipes, which I'm grateful I didn't have to do now.
This is a very minuscule change between these games, and it kinda rubs me the wrong way. It just comes across as change for the sake of change, and given how much effort I feel has been put into these games, it just comes across as unnecessary. Now, if the game was full of changes like this, I'd have a lot more of an issue with it. I know that a lot of the generational differences in these games tie back to the theme of duality, which admittedly is less prevalent in these games since our antagonist is no longer morally gray, but it is still there. This doesn't really fit with that, but I guess it's okay because most of the changes in these games are much larger in scope than this. It's not like I think the resources for this game were allocated in the wrong areas. This is honestly more of a nitpick than an actual criticism.
Solving the warp puzzle lets us confront Zinzolan, where he reveals the ship's power source is none other than the legendary dragon Kurum. Turns out he wasn't so much of a myth after all. Teaming up with Hugh to defeat Zinzolan, he once again asks the Shadow Triad to escort us off the frigate just before it takes to the skies before our eyes. What can I say? I'm a sucker for things that shouldn't fly but can anyways. Back to the Future train, bees, you name it. Charon gives us a clear direction to head, telling us to head to the Glacial Chasm, setting the stage for our ultimate showdown between Neoplasma for the fate of Unova once again. Now that we're in the climax of the story, coupled with the fact that we already have all the gym badges, there's really no downtime between story beats as we just head straight there, coming across 2 grunts in the cave blocking our path. A third comes along to usher the other 2 away, someone who we learn is a spy for Rude. We actually encountered him on the ship as well. He's one of the former Team Plasma grunts who sided with In after their initial collapse. Inside the crater, we see Rude and a pair of reformed Team Plasma members arguing with a handful of grunts. What's interesting to me about this conversation is that Rude is still trying to tell them that Getsus' plan is not for the betterment of Pokemon, but for his own selfish gain. Branding Rude as a traitor, however, they refuse to listen to him. I find this very interesting because up until this point I had been working under the assumption that they largely did not hold this belief anymore, at least not so far as to actually believe in it. It seemed like more of a defense than anything. But I don't know what they would gain from trying to lie to Rude in this scenario, however, so there must still be some sect of them who do believe that Plasma's doing the right thing. Couldn't say why, though. A battle here will let us board the frigate again once we take out these 2 grunts. One nice thing is that the ship being here changes the layout of the chasm, which is nice because the other version was a big spiral, and I'm still not exactly sure what happens when you touch the center of it. Thankfully, though, we don't really ever have to figure it out. This time around, we solve that password puzzle in order to progress, collecting various hints from the grunts while also trying to deal with this stupid bridge puzzle. I'm a little ashamed to admit that the whole thing took me like 15 minutes to complete. Even as the self-proclaimed puzzle enthusiast, I was not the greatest at navigating this bridge/wall puzzle. I also just kept forgetting which NPCs I'd already spoken to, which made me do a lot of backtracking. Once I got the numbers, putting them into the console is easy, just don't forget the plasma card, which allows you to do that in the first place. I actually had to reset the pipe puzzle I messed up so badly and accidentally got myself soft-locked. Now that we're on the cusp of destroying this machine, Zinzolan appears again to confront us. Fortunately, his team consists of 2 Cryogonals, so it's not really that hard to beat him. This means that it's finally time to confront Neoplasma's boss, Colress. A fun, but not particularly surprising reveal, as the color scheme of the ship heavily mirrors Colress's own design.
What is interesting is that Colress has been mildly helping us throughout the entire game, never once expressing any form of interest or support for Team Plasma. In fact, it's thanks to him and his help that we even board the ship when it's moored near Humilau. Colress, as the leader of Neoplasma, explains a lot about their heavy shift toward a more technological motif, rather than a more medieval one that they had in Black and White. I imagine he has no small part in building the ship that they now fly around Unova and terrorize its citizens, given that it's powered by Kurum.
I realize now that we don't know that much about Colress as an individual, but he's more than happy to explain his beliefs to us here and now. Colress has no care for Team Plasma or their goals. His real focus has always been on bringing out the potential of Pokemon, by any means necessary. His position as the leader of Neoplasma is only a means to an end in that regard. It's the resources it gives him that he cares about, nothing else. Notably, though he doesn't really align himself with Team Plasma, he's not a good person either. Colress has no qualms about causing damage and destruction if it can yield him the results he's looking for. "So be it" is a phrase he repeats multiple times in this conversation. Colress's theme is wildly underrated in my opinion. In fairness, I don't actually know the popularity levels of these themes, so let me rephrase that. I really like Colress's theme and feel like it should be talked about more. It's very weird and mechanical sounding. if there was ever a use for a theremin, it's right here in this theme. Our confrontation against Colress is much different than our encounter with In serving as Team Plasma's leader. That was a clash of our ideologies, the culmination of his work and beliefs. In wants to prove he's done the right thing, and when we beat him, he finally relents that maybe he hasn't. No such thing will occur with Colress. Sure, this fight is still the culmination of Colress's ideas, but he's not trying to prove that to us. He's a scientist. This is nothing more than an experiment to him. Defeating him only means that his hypothesis is wrong, and he simply needs to come up with a new idea, a new way to bring out the potential of Pokemon. Colress cares nothing for the people he's commanding, sure, but he also doesn't care about what they're doing either. Beating Colress won't make him see reason. He doesn't care about that. The stakes of this battle are just a lot lower. It's obviously still important, but defeating Colress does not mean defeating Neoplasma the same way defeating In meant defeating Team Plasma. We also know that Ghetsis is likely still involved. The reveal of his deception only works the first time. After defeating him, he asks us if the reason our Pokemon are so strong is because of the relationship we've formed with them. When I tell him yes, he seems very appreciative of this information, ultimately saying whether I or Team Plasma prove victorious will shape the relationship between people and Pokemon. The conflict we started 2 years ago will finally be resolved here. Colress does remind me of In this regard. In is a much kinder individual, obviously. His actions stem not from a pursuit of knowledge, but out of a desire to do right by Pokemon. However, both of these people are very receptive to being challenged on their approaches. Ghetsis is just not good at choosing a leader who's loyal to him, that's for sure. We can now access the other side of this hallway, but before I do that, I stopped to talk to this NPC again, and the dialogue he has is very interesting to me. He talks about how the Plasma members used to be unified. Objectively not true, but whatever. Now that they're separated, he has a hard time drawing the line of friend or foe. People you've known for years, forced to come to terms with that even if you were once friends, you still have a moral obligation to intervene, no matter if it hurts them or not. Also, he's a dick because this is a time-sensitive and region-impacting situation, and this fuck makes us play 20 questions to free Kyurem. I realize now that this is the first time we've seen Ghetsis all game. His appearance is a lot more menacing this time around. In fairness, his robe was creepy last time too, but it was at least colorful, so you might be a little tricked. He seems shocked that Colress cares nothing for the pursuits of Team Plasma, and instead has spent his time focused on his goal of drawing out the potential of Pokemon. We've encountered Colress 5 or so times throughout our adventure, and I could have figured that out myself. This goes right back to what I said. Ghetsis is just a terrible judge of people, but maybe he's hoping Colress's total lack of conscience would translate into him being a ruthless leader. It is a better plan than somehow trying to get in to rule Unova without compassion. Ghetsis' current plan is to use Kyurem's full power to freeze the entire region, presumably using the DNA splicers to do so. He tells us about Kyurem's origins as the vessel that used to be the singular legendary dragon. He calls upon the Shadow Triad to take care of us. Hugh finally gets to track down the Purloin that was stolen from his sister in the possession of one of the Triad members, who admits that he stole it 5 years ago. It's interesting to hear the Shadow Triad espouse much of the same rhetoric that In did, albeit with a little bit more of a criminal solution. The Shadow Triad seem to have far fewer qualms about committing criminal acts, but they still empathize with Pokemon. Yet when Ghetsis gives the order that he intends to freeze the region to rule it, they seem to have no problem with this. They also witnessed En's confrontation with his father and still choose to break him free from being arrested. One of the Triad members talks about how they know Ghetsis is selfish and has no desire to help Pokemon, but see his situation as one that is still beneficial to Pokemon, if unintentionally. How freezing the entire region, irreparably damaging the ecosystem for the Pokemon the Triad claims to care about would be beneficial for them, I have no clue. All of this is to say that the motives of the Triad confuse me. If they were just another series of cronies following Ghetsis' orders, we wouldn't be talking about this right now, but they're not. Their values align far better with In, and yet they did not choose to follow him. The Triad clearly have a strong sense of loyalty to Ghetsis, who rescued them much like he rescued Aletha, Concordia, and In. Heading into the cavern, Ghetsis tells us this place is essentially the seat of Kyurem's power, ordering it to freeze the entire region. But first, he decides to have Kyurem kill us. Like, straight up, Ghetsis tries to murder a child here. Credit where it's due, the man is not fucking around. He doesn't really get the chance though, as Zekrom intervenes right at the last moment. In has finally made his appearance in this game, here to confront his father once more. This time, he's not the same naive person he had been before. He also still talks super fast, which I appreciate. In declares that he intends to protect not just the Pokemon from Ghetsis' wrath, but the people of Unova as well. One interesting thing here is how the Shadow Triad serve almost as context to the kind of person In was before. He wasn't so callous as to let Ghetsis commit a crime for the sake of control, no, but he was someone who definitely prioritized the well-being of Pokemon above basically all else, with little regard for anything. Honestly, the Shadow Triad shows us just how far In has come as a person in this moment. Ghetsis chastises In for disrespecting him, criticizing him for ruining all his plans after all he'd done for him. I guess this goes to show that Ghetsis didn't just turn In into a traitor to maintain control, he really does believe it himself. Unfortunately, this whole thing was part of the plan, as either Zekrom or Reshiram is necessary in order to use the DNA splicers, and In has just brought the Pokemon of Ideals to Ghetsis' doorstep, which will allow him to enact the final step of his plan. I love this cutscene. It looks amazing, and it makes Kyurem look like a real threat, which is a long way from some random-ass dragon we found in a cave. I know people have historically given the design of Kyurem black and white for being over-designed, and I'll agree they're not simple designs, but as far as being the worst, I can't agree on that. For all the shit these games get, let's not pretend like Gen 1 was the pinnacle of Pokemon design. I like Kyurem because looking at it, it does feel incomplete, and I think that both halves of Kyurem black and white go a long way to making it look powerful, making it look like a fusion of these Pokemon would in fact be something that could devastate and control. It's clear to me why Ghetsis thinks he can rule with it. Lots of legendary Pokemon are powerful, but they don't always convey that purely through their designs. I like Xerneas, don't get me wrong, but it's grandiose more in how awe-inspiring it is, and less about how powerful I think it is. I don't know, maybe it's just because when I first met it, it was a tree. The other kind of interesting thing is that for as much as I've talked about the limitations of the DS, and more specifically how it relates to cutscenes, this one actually looks pretty good. In the Pokemon Generations episode depicting this moment, it plays out largely as we've already seen it here. The background has much more texture compared to the cutscene, but it also doesn't have the same suspension of disbelief something like the conflict with the sages has in In's castle. As far as the action sequence goes, the two are pretty much identical, save for the part where the protagonist is missing from the animated scene. Unfortunately for us, we aren't allowed to catch Kyurem here, which makes sense because we'd get 2 legendaries for the price of 1. The problem here is that, sorry to spoil this, we won't get a chance to catch Kyurem before heading to the Elite Four. He's only obtainable after completing the main game. This was something I praised the last game for, allowing us to use so many of the legendaries before we've completed the game, and to be fair, we can still catch the Swords of Justice. Notably though, this game has a much larger post-game than the original, so at least there's a lot more to do with Kyurem once we beat the game. The unfortunate thing for past me, playing through this game to record footage, is that I didn't remember I wouldn't be able to use him on my team for the Elite Four, because I thought I'd be able to catch him after defeating Ghetsis, which isn't true. Now, Black and White aren't much better in this regard. You catch Reshiram or Zekrom long enough to use them in exactly 2 battles. One last neat thing about this battle is that Kyurem's theme uses the same opening as the game does. Every time we've opened the game we hear this theme, and now the stakes have been fully realized. Anyways, with Kyurem defeated, it splits back in 2, freeing Zekrom from Ghetsis' control. He becomes absolutely enraged, his arrogance now replaced with unbridled anger. Because not only has Zekrom been freed, but so is Kyurem. Ghetsis immediately challenges us to a battle, with N healing our Pokemon right before, much like last time. There's one thing I don't like about this whole sequence, and it's how we fight Kyurem first. From a story perspective, I guess I understand why. Ghetsis believes that Kyurem is so powerful that it'll end the fight before we even have the chance to face off against him. The problem with this is that the nature of Pokemon's battle mechanic makes this a 1v6 fight, and it's not like Kyurem is a crazy level either. He's 55. And sure, Ghetsis' ace is level 52, but that's not really a substantial difference at this point in the game. I'd like this fight a lot better if it worked the way Volo's encounter did in Legends Arceus, where Volo tries to take us on himself and Giratina appears when he eventually fails. The issue is that we've already learned that this is not Ghetsis' MO. He always acts as a last resort, battling us when there's no other option. The fight against Ghetsis is no less daunting than the last one. The major difference here is that the game won't end when I defeat him this time. Part of why I think we should fight Kyurem last is because I know how difficult this fight against Ghetsis will be, meaning our team will be severely weakened when we fight Kyurem. But at this point I think I'm designing a game that might be too difficult for children. I think the Volo fight, which is effectively a 6v8, proves that. Of course, Ghetsis is still cheating with his Hydreigon. In fact, he's cheating even more now that it's level 52 instead of 54. I think the music in this fight really does well at setting this tone for the apex of our conflict against Team Plasma's real leader. It's far more menacing than Kyurem's theme, which, while a good sounding theme, didn't really fit the context of the situation nearly as well as this one does. The game will continue after this, sure, but the story, by and large, will not. The story of these games has been coming together to culminate in this room, and I think those stakes are matched by Ghetsis' theme. After an 11-minute battle against him, the victory theme has never felt more fitting. Lamenting his defeat, Ghetsis complains that this is the second time he's been beaten by an unknown trainer who uses Pokemon the wrong way, and confronts his father, hesitating to even call him that, explaining that Pokemon are not tools, finally coming to understand the symbiotic relationship between people and Pokemon. He says that some humans understands this, and asks why Ghetsis cannot. I assume this is a fun nod to our character from the last game, the very person who shattered N's original worldview. Ghetsis, in turn, does what he's always done, deny and shift the blame, calling in a freak to discredit him so that he can shift the blame off himself. The Shadow Triad intervenes once again, though this time it seems like they do this more for N's sake than their leader, saying that Lord Ghetsis has lost control and they'll take it from here. N starts a sentence by saying that without him, Team Plasma will, but it's cut off when the Shadow Triad member understands what he's about to ask, and says farewell, leaving with Ghetsis in tow.
We never see Ghetsis again. Not in any true capacity anyway. The closest we come is in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, where an alternate version of him from a different timeline appears, one in which Ghetsis has succeeded in his goals.
N talks to us about our battle 2 years ago, and how we and Alder taught him to expand his worldview, seeing more than just one side of the argument. He now believes that people and Pokemon together is the way forward. That's the way to unlock their full potential, and he hopes that one day people will have no need for Pokeballs, a truly equal system. This conversation teaches us that N has not changed completely. That's a good thing. I praised N for his values in the previous game, and I would have hated to see them go back on that for this one. N asks us what our goals are before encouraging us to take on the Pokemon League and departing from the chasm on the back of Zekrom. Hugh comes in to tell us that the ship has departed and that he managed to get his sister's Pokemon back from the Shadow Triad, remarking that he still can't take it out of its Pokeball. We are once again told to take on the Elite Four by heading to Victory Road. Entering Route 23, the tone here is much different than when we entered the route right before Victory Road last time. The music is triumphant, finally signaling to us that it is in fact over. Team Plasma has been truly beaten. Contrast this with Route 10, which had a very imposing feeling about it, knowing that we were almost certainly going to have to challenge in order to stop Team Plasma. This whole stretch of game feels very much like a victory lap, until we come to the Elite Four and must undergo our final challenge. This is probably my favorite route in the game, purely just for how it looks. There's so much texture here, it just looks so much more dynamic than other locations in the game. With the collapse of the old Victory Road and the shuttering of Route 10, a new badge gate has been constructed, and this one is much less inspired than the original. Now, I have a confession to make. When recording this playthrough, apparently I wasn't recording the first time around when I went through the badge checker up until I completed the Elite Four. You can see in my notes that I was not happy about this, especially because of how close the battle had been against the champion. I think I eked out on like 4 HP with my last Pokemon. Nevertheless, I had to borrow footage of the badge scanning process, and all the stuff in this section comes from me reloading the game and playing through these areas a second time. This is not important to the story, but I've been holding on to this baggage for months and just wanted to share it with you all. I like this version of Victory Road better. The gimmick was neat, but this one is much more visually interesting than the last one, and this time we're required to use the HMs they've been giving us all game. The gimmick in this one is much less pronounced than the first time around. These areas differ in very minor ways. The first section is outside. There are 2 bridges here, and in each game one works while the other is broken. The trainers also have vastly different placement. This change at least makes the way you go about scaling the mountain a little different between each version. The other change was so minuscule I felt like I was playing Where's Waldo trying to figure it out. In the forest section, these NPCs swap places. That's it. The first Victory Road was a lot of just going in and out of caves, and while that's a large component of this one, there is still a little bit more variety. There is one place that's blocked off by a Zoroark though, that's kinda weird. The Pokemon League is almost completely unchanged. The exterior is the same as it was last time. We could even take a trip over to the other Victory Road and see just how fucked it is. Of course, this does mean we can't visit Route 10 either, and I would have been interested to see how the landslide changed that area. But of course, the main reason it's blocked off is because they changed the progression of this game, meaning Opelucid City was no longer gym number 8. The Elite Four hasn't changed in any fundamental way. All the trainers stay the same, they all use the same types, and you can still take them on in any order you'd like. The only noteworthy change is the design of their rooms, which have all been overhauled. Where before they almost all involve some kind of spiral, this time they're all staircases. This change isn't really impactful one way or the other. I have no problem with this change, and I don't think the new ones are better or worse than the original. These rooms are a lot more samey, but they do still have fun animations, even if I don't like them as much. I still like them. We've also kept the Elite Four theme from the last game, which is great because this theme is a certified banger. The real change comes when we defeat all 4 members, allowing us to descend and face the champion. The preamble to all this is still the same. Talk to the statue, descend, walk back up the stairs. This door is still not centered, but whatever, I'll get over it. The steps to the champion's room initially look the same, but as soon as you ascend the steps, you'll realize that's not true. The whole thing is atop a large pyramid, almost like a ziggurat. At the top sits a giant, astrological-looking dragon statue, along with the new champion, Iris. It occurs to me that in the first game, we don't get to know Alder all that well, at least when it comes to him being the champion. I never fought him, and he spends much of the game shirking his responsibilities as Unova's champion, something Getsus chastises him for. He only goes back in order to defend his title from N.
In most Pokemon games, the reveal of the champion is always somewhat obvious. Which randomly detailed and unique NPC could the champion be? I wonder. In this game it's a little different since we already know Iris. This is similar to Wallace becoming the champion in Pokemon Emerald, except up to this point we've had several more encounters with Iris than you do with Wallace.
This fight is my favorite moment in this game. It doesn't quite beat out our conversation with N from the last one, otherwise it'd be my favorite moment in either of these games. The mood in this fight could not be more different than it was when we fought Getsus in Black and White, which was also our last fight before the post-game. The music is full of hope and energy. It makes me think about everything we've had to overcome as the player, not just in this game, but both of them. It also captures the energy of the new champion as well. To my knowledge, there's no concrete definition of how old Iris is supposed to be, but it's clear that she's young, and so having a very upbeat theme full of energy is very fitting for her. I also really like the animated background that we see during this fight, because I don't think any of the other areas in the game have an animated background except this one, because it really stood out to me as soon as I saw it. To complement Iris's bubbly personality, she wields a team of terrifying Dragon-type Pokemon, well, mostly Dragon-type Pokemon. This battle is what I consider the send-off for Generation 5, and damn does it feel good. It's not the end of the game, sure, but once again, it is by and large the end of the narrative. We'll have a few details to wrap up once we start the post-game, but that's mostly just a handful of conversations with N. The feeling I feel both in the moment of this battle, as well as talking about it in hindsight, is something I'm going to call happy remorse. I'm sad that it's over, knowing that this will shut the doors on Gen 5's role in the Pokemon story, but I'm glad that I got to experience it. Doubly glad that I got to experience it when it came out. I mentioned that this fight almost kicked my ass the first time around, but for the one I actually recorded, I put on a much more convincing show. Iris puts it best here. I may be sad that it's over, but more than that, I'm happy. I want to be clear, she didn't say that first part, that's my own opinion. This Hall of Fame animation also kicks ass, but that might just be because I love hidden rooms so much. In the record room, Iris talks about the bond between us and our Pokemon, how we came to grow through battle, and we place our Pokemon on the machine in order to play out the Hall of Fame cutscene. I never technically entered the Hall of Fame last time, so we didn't really get to talk about this, but it's a pretty standard affair for Pokemon games, so I don't really think it's worth mentioning all that much. Before the credits roll, however, one thing of note happens. We receive something called the Challenge Key. The key system is a feature I want to talk about in a moment, but first we do need to get through the game's credits. Iris guides us out of the Hall of Fame and back down the Champion's Room. Fireworks go off as we say goodbye to all the members of the Pokemon League. The title card appears, followed by a series of snapshots of us making our way back home, stopping at all the notable places along the way. This kind of serves as an epilogue of sorts, showing us things like Drayden helping to rebuild Opelucid City, or Clay speaking to the reformed Plasma members. There's no sadness here, no profound message we've been left to deal with. It's truly over now. All we have left to do is celebrate the defeat of Team Plasma, a defeat that we are instrumental in causing, until eventually we make our way back home. We do get a shot of N and Zekrom toward the end, gazing out over the landscape, presumably waiting for us due to reasons I'll explain in a moment. Finally, after the credits have finished, we see our character walk back into Aspertia City, being greeted outside by our mother before heading inside. The end. I tried not to let personal nostalgia cloud my perception of these games throughout both of these reviews. I know it's inevitable. The nature of my experience playing these games makes it impossible to disentangle them from the games themselves, but for a moment here I want to forego any semblance of objectivity to talk about these games and what they mean to me. I played these games during some of the most formative years of my life. I was 1 month shy of 10 when Pokemon Black came out, and I was 11 as of the release of Pokemon Black 2. I think back on what my life was like at that age, being in the 5th grade, talking about Pokemon with my friends, playing pretend Pokemon battles outside during recess. Yes, I was that kind of child. I spent most of my life being told by others that growing up was something to be avoided at all costs. I internalized that message before I was even 9, and I don't know that I've ever really changed in that regard. I had no desire to be an adult, and I think that's still partially true even now. I like having money and being able to do whatever I want, but wanting to be a child symbolizes that desire to go back to a point where you had zero responsibility, where your time seemingly stretched on for a length that was totally unfathomable to you. I know not everyone had these experiences, not everyone had a good childhood. The fact that I was allowed to is a privilege, and one that I'll admit I sometimes take for granted. Nevertheless, these games mark a shift in my life not just because they're the last games on the DS, but because it marks the point in my life in which middle school started. The slow ascent towards more responsibility. Things gradually get harder and harder until I end up where I am right now. But at that time, in that moment, things haven't quite changed yet. But they're about to. The goodbye in these games marks the start of that change. I see that goodbye in my own life, and even playing them now, I can't help think about it over a decade later. I'm aware Pokemon isn't high art. There are so many more games with better narratives, better mechanics, better ways of telling that narrative, but none were so accessible to me as a child like Pokemon. And this game does genuinely try to put together a more complicated narrative aimed towards children. This is the start of some of Pokemon's most serious arcs, and I feel lucky that I got to experience it at such an important time in my life. When I say these games leave me speechless, this is why.
I can feel this essay getting far too deep and personal for my own liking, so let's move back to more shallow waters and talk about the key system. Each game comes with a different set of digital keys. These keys control a couple different things, like the difficulty of the game, which Endgame City is currently in your world, and a third secret that we've yet to uncover. The cool thing about this is that you can trade these keys with someone you know who has the opposite game as you, allowing you to have access to both Black City and the White Forest. This is just a really cool change that makes it that much more unique because it's all customizable. It helps to make the two-game difference a little less significant, while still encouraging kids to trade with one another in order to get the full experience, without locking one side out of certain features or Pokemon, because once you have a key, it's yours to keep unless you delete your save file.
I think it's important that we tackle the post-game a little bit before I finally try to take a look at the story of these games as a whole. Now, I won't be covering every single thing you can do in the post-game, partially because I still want you guys to play these games and discover things for yourself, and partially because I think it would take too long in what is already going to be a long video. I mean, we're basically at the runtime of the last video, and we still have a lot of ground to cover, so there's that. Leaving our home, we're greeted by Hugh and his sister, who thank us for helping her find her Purloin, which is now a Liepard. She also says she's having dreams of a Zoroark on Victory Road. That's weird. Why the Zoroark appears to her in a dream, I haven't the foggiest, but at any rate it sets a clear destination for us immediately. Once we go there, we find the Zoroark on the mountainside, urging us to follow him. He eventually leads us to a massive cavern, housing the ruins of N's castle. Inside the castle, we find N waiting for us. He tells us about Ghetsis' demise the first time, events we're all too familiar with. He invites us to head to the central hall, but instead of leading us straight there, he opts to follow us to see what we choose to interact with. If we head into N's room, he'll begin telling us about his past, which shocked me given how little N likes to talk about himself in the first place. He tells us that this room was his entire world, how he was abandoned in the woods and raised by Pokemon, something we've already seen in the opening cinematic for Pokemon Black and White. One day, a man appeared, Ghetsis. He told N that he was his father. N says the things Ghetsis gave him were his last name, Harmonia, knowledge on how to become Team Plasma's king, and hurt and injured Pokemon who wouldn't even talk to N, as well as this room. He then opts to wait for the player outside. One thing I find interesting about this room is how little it's changed compared to the first time we saw it. The castle as a whole is a complete wreck. Pillars have fallen, the ground is eroding away, water no longer flows. Yet, for all the damage, this room is largely intact, save for the lights and a handful of toys that have been knocked over. There's no substantial damage here, unlike the rest of the castle. Part of me wonders if N has been here since its collapse. It's also worth mentioning that the only item in this room is a luxury ball, a type of Pokeball that helps to raise the friendship level of a Pokemon caught in it faster. The only other thing we can do at this point is lead into the central hall, where he instructs us to head inside. We can now truly witness the extent of our destruction. We had a brief glimpse of the aftermath before, but that was when the castle was not in complete ruin. A single ray of light cast itself upon the stage where we had our confrontation with N. There is no grandeur to this place anymore. It feels hollow, like a relic. This place has been preserved from the very moment where it was abandoned, when everyone abandoned it.
Now, I say all that like it's a bad thing. This castle, to me, represents Ghetsis' ambitions, extravagant and grandiose, his ultimate plan for conquering Unova, now in complete ruin. There's nothing left for anyone here. Nobody is left to take up the mantle of his ambition.
N tells us it was 2 years ago, and it was this very spot where N was challenged by a certain trainer, by us. A battle for truth and ideals, and truth proved victorious. But more than a defeat, this moment was an awakening for N. It showed him that to truly help the Pokemon of the world, he would first have to understand that we were not his enemies. That him and us, we still fought for the same thing. He wants to see if we're capable of that too. N challenges us to a battle, and once again we get another version of his theme. This time, however, the stakes are different. His theme is much more in line with the first one we heard. This battle is still a test of wills, but there's no ambition, no world-changing drive. This battle reminds me of our battle with Charon on Route 10. It's a test of our strength, our determination. Not as a point of comparison, but to prove that we're capable, that we're ready for what comes next. Even though in Zekrom is level 70, this fight isn't particularly hard. It's his only Pokemon. Well, that's the intention at least. I don't have any ground-type Pokemon, and only Ferrothorn resists both of his types. Thanks to a single Max Revive, though, we can get this done with just a little bit of difficulty. Now that we've proven we're capable of change, N decides to entrust us with Zekrom, a decision I can't imagine comes easy to him. N spent 2 years traveling the world, likely with Zekrom as his only companion. But N recognizes Zekrom's role is to help other people pursue their goals, something that N has already achieved. He's finally come to understand what he needs to do, and now, thanks to Zekrom, he's capable of doing that on his own. Zekrom then returns to his Darkstone form, which N entrusts us with, telling us to take the stone to Dragon Spiral Tower. Before we leave, though, I wanted to get one last good look at this room, specifically where N revealed Zekrom to us right before our final fight, and where he would ultimately set forth on his journey. Of course, now that the castle is back underground, it's completely sealed off. Heading to Dragon Spiral Tower, we still have to enter through that hole Team Plasma created 2 years ago. The atmosphere in here this time is drastically different. The peaceful music invites reflection, meditating on our journey up to this point. This time around, we're the ones seeking to awaken Zekrom from the Darkstone. I like Dragon Spiral Tower when I don't have to fight 15 Plasma Grunts in order to get to the top. At the top of the tower, we're asked to bring out the Darkstone. The cutscene that plays here is almost exactly the same as the one that plays in N's castle. There's no tension in the scene, of course. It's not part of some grand climax. It's much more like a passing of the torch. We've been given this opportunity by N, and because of that, the theme feels much more in line with what's happening here than it did with the scene at N's castle. I waste no time in using the Master Ball to add Zekrom to our team, which means that now all we have left to do is go find Kyurem again. N arrives and informs us that Kyurem is once again at the Giant Chasm. He speaks hopefully about the world that we will work to create, again emphasizing a time in which people will no longer have a need for Pokeballs. One thing I really appreciate is that this isn't the last appearance of N. In fact, we can talk to him basically anytime we want. N appears in Nimbasa City every Friday, where we can ride the Ferris wheel with him. We can also battle him in his castle, where he has 4 different teams he can use, one for each different season. Each team also focuses on a specific type of weather. There isn't much else to say about the Giant Chasm. It's exactly the way we left it. Heading into the deepest chamber of the cave, we once again come face to face with Kyurem, free from the influence of Ghetsis. Once Kyurem is caught, Charon and Bianca enter the cave as well. They encourage us to go visit Juniper in Nuvema Town, somewhere that up until now has been completely inaccessible. As they leave the chasm, I realize that Kyurem has dropped something upon being caught. These are, of course, the DNA splicers, which now allow us to fuse Kyurem into either form, depending on which of the two Pokemon we use. Of course, I only have Zekrom, so we can only make Kyurem black. This finally allows me to complete my party as I originally planned it out. Sorry, Hatsune Miku. As I said before, I don't intend to go over every single piece of post-game content, but there are a couple that I want to focus on, so let's head back to Driftveil City and take a look at this cave. We weren't allowed in here before entering the Hall of Fame, but now that we have, Clay Tunnel is complete. Visually, this place is the same as Twist Mountain. I don't really have anything else to add in that regard. You can ride these minecarts around to warp to different locations, but that's about it. The interesting thing about this place comes from a location called the Underground Ruins. The only thing in this room is a door that looks vaguely familiar and an eye on the floor. Through the door is a series of ruined statues, on a few of which appears the message, Chamber of the One that joins the sun protecting this place. 2 answers are needed to find the path. Courageous one, let me tell you the answer I know. Check the ground 6 steps down and at blank steps right of the eyeball. The other answer can only be found when the moon is in the sky. The world is split into 2, day and night, black and white. The protectors were born out of rock, ice, and magma. If we come back at night, we get another set of directions, this time adding 9 steps right in addition to 6 steps down. Combining both instructions together grants us access to the Peak Rock Chamber, which houses Regirock. See, me talking about the Regi Trio has come full circle, and I did not write that reference and then forget that we would catch the Regi Trio in this game. I like this puzzle a lot. It pays homage to the original puzzle you performed in order to obtain these Pokemon, except this time we have a lot less obfuscation. This is also where the last key comes from. Each game can catch Regirock, but they also have an exclusive Pokemon. Catching Regirock immediately gives us access to the Iron Chamber key, where in White 2 we would have gotten the Iceberg Chamber key. This is probably my favorite use of the key system, allowing us to catch both Pokemon for ourselves instead of having to receive one of them from somebody else. You still have to communicate with someone else to get the key, but they don't have to give you their legendary in order to catch Regigigas, which you can do by taking all 3 of the trio into a new room at the bottom of Mount Twist. There are many legendaries we can catch in this game, but these are probably my favorite. I've always liked the mystery element to the Regi Trio, and appreciate when games try and recapture that sense of discovery and puzzle solving. I followed many a fake tutorial on how to uncover hidden legendary Pokemon in games. I did this whole process to try and get to Naval Rock and Pokemon Emerald, totally unaware that I needed an event that had long since happened. Also here in Driftveil is the PWT. We got a trial run of sorts while playing the main story, but now that we've completed it, I'd like to talk a little bit more about it. The PWT and Battle Subway are largely interchangeable in terms of gameplay. What sets them apart is the presentation. The PWT is organized into a series of tournaments, which we can compete in and unlock by meeting various requirements. These tournaments include notable characters from all over the world of Pokemon. Mostly they're comprised of gym leaders from previous games. 54 total characters can serve as participants of the PWT, 56 if we include Hugh and Colress, who appear in the first Driftveil tournament we take part in as part of the story. I ended up playing a lot of this during the recording. I like competitive battles pretty well, so I didn't really need that much convincing to play through this one. Functionally, this mode is just the Battle Subway with fan service. I know that, but damn if they didn't commit. They covered all their bases up to this point. Hell, even Juan is here. But part of me thinks that this is just so Wallace can be in the Champions Tournament, otherwise there wouldn't be enough of them to do a bracket of 8. Each trainer also has their own animated opening pose, which in Black and White was a trait only reserved for your rivals Charon, Bianca, and Anne. The characters from Gen 3 also didn't have sprite designs on the DS, which means those were also created for the game as well. I know this is a fairly minor feature, all things considered, but it's the amount of effort that I see here that makes me want to talk about it. This could have just been a bracket-style tournament with the notable characters from this game as opponents, but it's not just that. Instead, they ported over all the gym leaders from games past, as well as remastered their respective themes to fit in with the other music from Gen 5. I sunk an hour and a half into this during my recording sessions, and honestly, it was a lot of fun to go down this competitive nostalgia trip. Way back at the beginning of this video, I touched briefly on Pokestar Studios. We had to run through one of the films in order to progress the game further, but I largely tabled the discussion of the whole thing for later. Well, after over an hour, we're finally going to talk about it. This is my favorite feature in this game. The very first time I played it, back in 2012, I'm pretty sure I did every single film that was unlocked right at the start before I finally left for Castelia City. At its core, the goal is simple. You're doing Pokemon battles, but you're not necessarily trying to win. The script gives you instructions on what your objective is for the given scene. Sometimes that objective is to win, but it's not always. You'll also need to deliver lines during the battle, which affect the outcome of the story. You'll notice right away that a fair portion of the time we're not fighting a Pokemon. We're fighting these green props, which will become the various non-Pokemon enemies that appear in the film, as though the effect is being created in post-production. Once you shoot a film, you can watch the finished version in the theater, as well as see how much money your film makes. Each film also has 3 different endings depending on your actions during the battle. Following all the instructions and delivering the right lines will result in the good ending. Typically, fainting during the battle will result in the bad ending. There's also a hidden ending of sorts you can get in each film, usually involving performing a specific action. For instance, in this Ghost Eraser film, you can achieve the strange ending by doing what the script says, knocking out a foe in every scene, except when you give the last line, choose the option that says you are both liars. In terms of success, getting the strange ending tends to yield the best result, but figuring out how to get these endings is largely just trial and error. Additionally, you're not limited to the rental Pokemon provided to you for a film, you can also use your own Pokemon. Getting a strange ending with your Pokemon will prompt Stu here to say that it's been performing with more acting chops than before. If we send it out in battle now, a new animation plays that indicates our Pokemon is a movie star. Notably, this does override the shiny animation, but it's well worth it because I've seen it play out all game. There are so many special Pokemon made specifically for this feature. All these prompts, the post-production versions, the trainers, there are 10 different series of films with a total of 36 movies you can create. There's genuinely so much to do here, and it's such a fun spin on Pokemon battling. I wish there were more features in Pokemon that tried to put a spin on the battle mechanics in this way. I'm struggling to think of anything that even comes close. If I'm missing something, please let me know in the comments, because I genuinely would like to know. This is a feature that I've just barely scratched the surface on. I know this game is a decade old, and purchasing a copy is prohibitively expensive, and I'm not going to encourage anyone to play these games on an emulator, wink wink. But this feature is so much fun that I'd encourage anyone who can play the game almost to do it for this alone. I managed to find an old interview with Junichi Masuda and Takao Unno talking a little bit about creating Pokestar Studios, and how it allowed them to create locations that had no basis in reality, even within the context of Pokemon. I love how out there some of these designs are. It's a neat piece of world building to see how fiction is created within a work of fiction. It really helps to define the boundaries of the reality of Pokemon, seeing what they consider to be science fiction or what they consider to be fantasy. One of the last things I want to talk about is the Abyssal Ruins. This is something that I touched on before, but I mentioned in Black and White that we didn't have all the pieces to solve the mystery yet, so I decided to put off talking about it until this game. After obtaining the Die of HM and defeating Hugh in a battle, Zinzolin appears, no longer dressed like he lives in a freezer. He gives us research that Getsus had been working on, calling it a way to atone for his sins. I'm curious at which point Zinzolin realized his actions were wrong, because never once did I think he had any conscience about his actions, especially because it seemed like he and Getsus were largely on the same page. Yet the narrative keeps trying to frame the whole thing like Getsus had still convinced him that they were doing the right thing. I don't buy this though, because the other leader of Team Plasma, Colress, was chosen for his lack of ethics, and he largely spent most of his time conducting experiments of a dubious nature.
I just have a hard time believing that Neoplasma believed they were doing the right thing given their figurehead leader was a mad scientist and their mastermind was Getsus. At any rate, Zinzolin finally gives us the key to solving the mystery of the Abyssal Ruins.
Getsus' notes will now allow us to decipher the mystery symbols on the walls. I love a good side mystery in a video game, and Pokemon has no shortage of them. The Gen 6 era had quite a few in the form of the strange Hex Maniac girl in Lumio City, or the strange girl in Phoebe's room in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. This mystery is far more complex, however, as there are 3 floors to the ruins, each one containing several different ciphers, some of which are necessary to solve in order to get to the top of the ruins. There are 4 different spots in Undula Bay you can dive down in order to enter the ruins. Once inside, you are allowed 500 total steps before you are whisked back out by a torrent of water. The player receives a warning at 100, 300, and 450 steps before finally being ejected from the ruins. In addition to the puzzle that has to be solved, there are dozens of items scattered about the floors. Most of these items are relic items, which can be sold to the billionaire maniac for a very high price. The elemental plates which change Arceus' form are also located down here, with 2 exceptions. The Draco and Splash plates are found around Undula Bay, indicating that they likely come from the ruins as well. All around the ruins are these pinkish stones that contain weird symbols, but Getsus' notes will decode these into letters we can actually read. except it's a cipher, albeit not a complicated one. The letters change from floor to floor, but you'll always read them backwards. This one, for instance, says King turns 5th corner. The reason I put off talking about the ruins was because being able to decode the cipher was the key to actually progressing through the ruins. Nothing about them has actually changed. Now, anyone adept at cracking codes could have likely worked this out on their own without needing Getsus's research, as each symbol correlates with a letter or number, and they're written exactly as they're read. To complete the first floor, you simply need to get to the central pillar in fewer than 190 steps. Taking 190 or more would cause you to be met with the message, "No king gets lost." The second floor is substantially smaller than the first, as we now work our way up the pyramid. On the west side of the second floor, one of these purple pillars appears to be blocking the way. If we decipher it, we're met with text that looks to be absolute nonsense. What happens is that as you go up the floors, the letters shift in the cipher by 1 each time, meaning a K now becomes an L, an A becomes a B, and so on. Translating this message tells us to shine if agreed, and we'll talk more in a moment about what we're agreeing to, but if we use flash right here, the pillar moves and we now have access to the third floor. This time, if we head to the eastern part of the room, we can find another pillar blocking the way. This one has a message that's been shifted by 2 letters now. Decoding this one reveals it to say, "Act strong if agreed." This means that we need to use strength in order to proceed further, and sure enough, when we do, the pillar gives way to allow us to access the final floor. There's no maze to solve up here, just one item, the Relic Crown, the most valuable item in the entire ruins. We also have a few more messages we can decrypt though notably doing so reveals that Getsus's notes have some holes in them, and there are some symbols that we simply cannot decipher. Returning to Zinzolan, he congratulates us for making it all the way through these ruins, and says that his best guess for what it means is that a beloved king was laid to rest in the Abyssal Ruins, also speculating on whether or not he had any descendants, and what powers they might possess. Satisfied with this knowledge, Zinzolan gives us a big pearl before departing from the Undula Bay. So what does all of this mean? Well, Bulbapedia conveniently has a complete list of all the phrases you can find around the ruin, complete with translations, which saves me a ton of time on having to collect all that information myself. Bulbapedia is just a fantastic resource to begin with. It contains nuanced info on how the mechanics of the game work, as well as information that would be a lot of trial and error to find out on my own. Now, looking at the list of inscriptions on the first floor, I think we can split them into 2 groups. One half of them are instructions on how to solve the maze, all the ones that mention corners, as well as the last one that says primes lead to truth, which notably 2, 3, 5, and 7 all are. The other half of the inscription speak various praises of the kings Zinzolan spoke about. Things like, "King is kind, King has a dream, King accepts all." The second floor contains no instructions on how to proceed, save for the one singular pillar we use flash on, but instead contains a series of philosophies such as "War creates tears," "All is precious," "Don't be barbaric," and the one I find most interesting for our discussion, "Good or evil isn't all." By using flash there, the temple has asked us if we agree with what I have to assume are the king's philosophies, and we have. The third floor chronicles the king's various acts and abilities, such as "King talks to all beings," "Saved all from waves," and "King is hope for all." The only other pillar, aside from the one that lets us progress to the last floor, says to think, act with love. Once we've used strength, we've presumably agreed to all the king's feats and beliefs, bringing us face to face with the Relic Crown. All the plaques here contain at least one symbol that cannot be deciphered. When we try and use Getsus's notes to translate them, we get large blanks, which the game interprets as a series of dark circles. How many circles each plaque contains is not equal. The only one that doesn't contain any is the phrase "King is hope and future." The others are "King defeated blank alone," "Blank joined the king in a day," "King called blank beings," and lastly, "The great King blank." There are some very noteworthy things to talk about here, but for the sake of pulling everything together at once, I would like to put a pin in this discussion and come back to it in just a moment. Crossing Sky Arrow Bridge this time around is weird. I get the feeling we're returning home, but to our character that couldn't be further from the truth. I recognize all these places, all these locations, and I think back to the journey that we started 2 years ago. I think back to starting this video when I recorded the Pokemon Black gameplay in April of 2024. There's a massive disconnect between us and our character at this moment, because we're seeing how everything has changed since we were here the first time. I doubt if this bears any significance to our character, though. Heading home to Nuvema Town, we finally get to speak with Professor Juniper, who asks to see our Pokedex and congratulates us for meeting so many Pokemon. She then asks us to see every single Pokemon in the Unova Pokedex. If you manage to do this, Juniper will give you a permit to the Nature Preserve, where we'd be allowed to catch shiny Haxorus. Sadly, I did not attempt this in my playthrough. In fact, I've never been to the Nature Preserve in any playthrough of this game. The last stop on our journey is our house, the one from the very first moment of the very first game. As soon as we set foot inside, she immediately asks if we found the friend we were looking for, before turning to realize we are not her son. She does, however, recognize us, saying she knew our mother from when she worked at the Pokemon Center. The friend that her son was looking for, as she told us, was In. I know that as far as these games go, we'll never know if we found In. The story doesn't extend past the dimensions of the game. They're like invisible barriers that just cannot be crossed. We can speculate all we like, hope all we like, but the game will never bear any more answers for us. And the writers can say what they like about whether or not that happened, but does that really count? The game ends where it does. Most who played it would never see such a thing. To them, it doesn't exist. I choose to believe that In and the player character will meet again. Not only because I enjoy the good ending in games, but because ideas like this give me hope that I'll be able to reconnect with people I've separated from in my own life. I want to believe that such a thing is possible, so I do. At this point, I think we've covered as much of the game as I feel needed to in order to talk about what I really wanted to talk about. I do confess that the preceding 3.5 hours of information was something of a preamble to get to this point, but I thought it necessary to make sure we were all on the same page in regards to the story. Plus, I just wanted to talk about these games. I know they're fan favorites now, and I'm very grateful for that, but I'll always remember how disliked they were when I was a child. I don't think I'll ever be able to shake that perception from my mind. I still feel like enjoying these games as my own little club, which I know isn't the case anymore. I felt it worth saying what I loved about these games, what I thought made them special, and what I thought could have been better. When I made the first video, I had no expectation for success, and was amazed to see that it had happened anyways. It fills me with joy to know that I'm not alone in my love for Pokemon's 5th generation anymore. And I think part of the reason we've ended up in this place is by having others do the same thing that I'm doing right now, talking about this game, a game they loved, in much the same way old school fans talk about the original games. No Pokemon game is perfect, I know that. They have tons of imperfections. I mean, Gen 1 is held together by friction, but it still has the framework that the franchise is using 30 years later, and it's remarkable that the formula still yields massive success.
As the first Pokemon games with a direct sequel, there's an opportunity here that hasn't been afforded to any game before or since. The opportunity to tell a complete narrative arc that looks at these characters over multiple years, and at more than one point in their lives. You can tell a complete story in one game. I don't mean to make it sound like one game isn't enough for a full narrative, but it lets us look at these characters in broad strokes. How do they adapt after Team Plasma falls the first time? The notable thing about these games is the way they handle the player. These games are not the first to be sequels that use a different protagonist, but it's an uncommon enough characteristic that I think it's worth noting, as it changes the way we view the story. A lot of what we experience is different this time around, not just because things have changed. When we played through the first game, we were learning things as our character was, learning about Team Plasma, exploring Unova, meeting new people. We knew roughly as much as our character did. In these games, that's not true. Everyone still treats us like we've never met, they still teach us basic mechanics, and of course, I understand that they have to. These games, first and foremost, have to be accessible to children, and each game is someone's first Pokemon game. The onboarding process is a prerequisite. The lore needs to be easily understandable so that anyone who's tuning in for the first time has a complete understanding. Let's take a look at The Witcher 3 for a second. This game was wildly more successful than its predecessors. For many people, myself included, this was their introduction to Geralt of Rivia. Not only is this the third game in the series, but the story of the video games is a spin-off that takes place after the events of the books, so there's so much of Geralt's story that just is never directly talked about. And characters we meet will act like they already know these things, and that Geralt should know them too. Because at this point in the game, he does. This is not a criticism. I like this style of world building because it tells us that our character has experienced a lot of events outside of the game, and the world exists outside of these boundaries. The difference here is that this game is designed for an older audience. Their ability to infer things and apply context to the broader world is called upon here more than in Pokemon Black 2. The game doesn't feel like it has to teach you as many things as Pokemon does.
Because the story has a more long-form narrative than a traditional Pokemon game, we can focus longer on these characters. but because the player character is not the through line, I'd argue they are not the main character of the story of Black and White. The protagonist? Of course, we're always the protagonist in these games, but I'd argue the protagonist is rarely the character the narrative is about. N is the main character of Pokemon Black and White, seen through the lens of the player character, as we watch him grow from his original ideas of liberating all Pokemon to wanting to work toward a world where Pokemon don't need to be kept in Pokeballs. The idea of duality is the most ever-present theme in these games, and the way that it crops up in the narrative is almost often through our interactions with Team Plasma, and more specifically, N. Liberating Pokemon, or choosing not to, is a conflict that warrants actual discussion about the ethics of the world of Pokemon. The games touch on this idea, but never fully go all the way with it. N starts out being manipulated, being fed an image of the world unknown to him. That people are awful creatures who use Pokemon for their own gain, causing N to pursue his goal of liberating all Pokemon from people. The problem with Ghetsis' plan arises because once N is allowed out into the world, he meets people who will challenge his worldview. He meets us, the boy whose Pokemon tells N that it likes him, after we'd only been together for such a short time. The faltering in his resolution becomes clear after this moment. He still supports Team Plasma and their goals, but he insists on battling us, against his own beliefs, simply to try and prove that his resolve is stronger than ours, that he has what it takes to be the savior of Pokemon. But the more we beat him, the less sure he becomes about what he's doing. Our bond with our Pokemon manages to defeat him every single time. Our character is always present for these conflicts, but I don't know that we ever really learn anything throughout the course of the game. We largely end the story with the same opinion we held at the beginning, though maybe we understand N a little bit better now. Ultimately, it's he who must come to make a change. He's the one who leaves Unova to explore the world in order to gain a better understanding of it. This is kind of the problem with silent protagonists. Sure, they're great for inserting yourself into the world of the game, making them think, feel, and act like you. But without that internal monologue, we don't really ever get to understand where they started, what their ideals are. Black 2 and White 2 deals more with N's relationship with Ghetsis, and we get a look at some of the other family dynamics that he has, particularly through the Shadow Triad, who, while they hold many of the same values as N, still harbor immense loyalty to Ghetsis. N doesn't appear until late in the game, but immediately upon his arrival, the first thing he has to do is confront his father about his actions and truly stand up to him. Going back to the Abyssal Ruins and the messages we uncovered there, it seems clear to me that N is the descendant of the king mentioned in those inscriptions. I don't think this is supposed to be some great mystery either. The higher-up messages in the ruins spell it out pretty clearly. The king talks to all beings is a very direct parallel to N's ability to talk to Pokemon. Good or evil isn't all is another one that I find very fitting, given how long N spends being the antagonist of Pokemon Black, only for us to realize he wasn't really our enemy, that Ghetsis was. One of the messages from the top floor also mentions that King is hope for all, which harkens back to N's goal to truly unite people in Pokemon. Armed with this knowledge, I think we can try and decipher some of these blanks for ourselves. King called blank beings seems to me to be referring to Pokemon, as N spent much of the game arguing that people treated Pokemon as tools, where he saw them as beings. Blank joined King in a day makes me think of our character, joining forces with N to put a stop to Ghetsis. Either character is applicable in this situation. The original text likely refers to some great warrior joining forces with the king to defeat a great threat. That just leaves us with the great King N, former king of Team Plasma, one who thinks and acts with love.
I think there's an important question to be asked here. Why does any of this matter? Why spend all this time analyzing a game made for children? It's not like this game is particularly deep or morally complex. In fact, one of my many complaints has been that there was not enough moral complexity in the narrative for my liking. On a surface level, I don't think the answer to that question really matters. Not truly. Analyzing media doesn't change what people get out of it. Many children play this game without ever thinking any deeper about it, and they still manage to get something out of these games. I think the idea also serves to answer this question a different way. It's important to look at all media through a critical lens in order to understand why it's effective or why it isn't. You can never know how something works if you aren't willing to take it apart. I've spent my whole life invested in media in one form or another, and no matter the style, there's always something to be gained by scrutinizing media, looking at it with a more critical mindset. Pokemon is a game franchise, TV show, card game that millions of children have interacted with in one form or another. As the highest grossing media franchise of all time, I think it's worth looking at the kinds of narrative that are being told. Not because I'm concerned with the message, but rather because I want to look critically at the kinds of things that left a lasting impact on me as a kid. This didn't end up as my favorite game of all time just because I thought Pokemon were cool. It's because I connected with the story in ways I didn't even understand. It left an impact on me without even realizing it at the time. And I think that's worth talking about in media that can do that. Things that teach you without even realizing that it's happening. Isn't that the core of what media for kids is about? Imparting important life lessons in ways that stick with kids and that they engage with?
The release of X and Y firmly closes the book on not just the story of Gen 5, but the DS era of Pokemon. 3D will be the way all mainline Pokemon games are depicted moving forward. The charm of these games that I love so much is gone, and I don't think it'll return anytime soon. The closest we have are fan games that try and recapture this aesthetic, either through ROM hacks, taking the existing game assets and remodeling them to create new ones, or tools like the Pokemon Essentials engine. What I consider to be the golden era of Pokemon has come to an end. And if you don't agree with me on that, that's okay. I know this statement is rooted in my own nostalgia, and what makes the best era of Pokemon is entirely subjective. I'd love to hear about what your favorite Pokemon games are in the comments, along with why you like them so much. I do think the shift to 3D ruined a lot of the charm that older Pokemon had, and it's no secret these games are not optimized correctly. But for all the gripes I have about the 3DS era, and particularly the Switch era, I cannot deny that the stories featured in these games have major improvements. Sun and Moon have undoubtedly fantastic stories that deal with serious issues just as good, if not better, than the way the ones presented in Black and White are. I think the thing that weighs these games down is the fact that they formally laid the groundwork for the generational gimmick, as well as the whole issue that was Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon and what a second release should contain to justify itself. But all of that is a story for another time. Thank you so much for watching. I mean, honestly, when I started this project almost 2 years ago, I don't think I thought it would get finished. So to be here now is honestly amazing. Thank you to everyone for listening to me ramble about a Pokemon game for almost 4 hours. That is amazing. If you'd like to check out the first one, again or for the first time, here you go. And if you'd like to stay tuned for the next video, you can be sure to subscribe. And I do hope that you will join me next time.